evening. Welcome to this Valentine's Day work session. This meeting is called to order. Following the pledge, we will have a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As we are all still waiting to see events unfold in Florida, our hearts are with families and educators and the people of that community with the school shooting that happened just hours ago. The school was letting out. All right, on a closer to home and hopefully friendlier note, we have a very exciting agenda ahead of us. Couldn't think of more lovely way to spend Valentine's Day than with hours of my time here in this room with all of you kind folks. Before we get to the formal agenda, I imagine we have some announcements and updates. I have a whole list, so let me see if somebody else can take things off of my list first. Please go right ahead, Deputy Carmen.
Tomorrow night and Thursday evening, as well as a week from Thursday, we're going to start a new event at the Elks Lodge, Organ Groove Thursdays. And Paul Connors is a very gifted keyboard player and has a Hammond B3 organ, and he's going to park that at the lodge. And Thursdays we're going to have start at 7 o'clock, and there'll be a different trio basically every Thursday night. So kind of looking forward to that, kind of kick off your weekend early. Come to the lodge and enjoy some great organ, jazz, blues, rock. There'll be all kinds of different genres covered as part of that. So that's tomorrow night at 7:30 at the Elks Lodge. Thanks.
Anyone else?
I don't really have too much. I just want to publicly congratulate Tamara Bridgewater and Jermaine Smith on their first youth expo this last Saturday, and I see Dana White in the audience who also had an exhibit as well. It was well attended, and I hope to see more activity like that, really focusing on our youth. So I just want to congratulate them publicly.
Very nice. Sir?
Just a reminder that our emergency temporary shelter is currently open 7 days a week. All you have to do is walk down to the Open Door Family Medical Center at 9 p.m. A staff member will meet you. You will be taken to a host location where a warm meal will be provided. When you wake up, we'll have a hot meal for you for breakfast and a meal to go. So if you know anyone who is in need of temporary shelter during the winter months, please stop by. This Saturday, our county executive, George Latimer, and our county legislator, Catherine Borgia, will be hosting a coffee and conversation. It's a new initiative brought to you by our county executive's office, and that will be this Saturday from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. in the multi-purpose room of the Ossining Community Center. All residents in District 9, that includes Ossining, Briarcliff, Kirtland-on-Hudson, Cortland Manor, and Peekskill, are invited to join us. And it should be a good opportunity for you to meet your electeds and see what's going on at the county level. And as I mentioned last week, every week I'll be reading a quote in honor of Black History Month. And this one's quite fitting for President's Day coming up. It is, "Change will not come if we wait for another person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek, Barack Obama." So happy Black History Month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And fairly recent history in this
Yes.
case. Rika, did you have anything else? Okay, well, congratulations to our library for their kickoff last weekend. It was lovely. It was great to see so many folks there. And I will just use that as my entree into promoting one of the many wonderful programs that takes place at the Ossining Public Library. Put on my documentary and discussion series hat for a moment. Tomorrow night, join us in the Boudars Theater at 6:30. The name of the documentary we'll be watching is Soundtrack for a Revolution, with a really fantastic panel. The most familiar panelist to most of us in Ossining will be KJ Dennert, and she is one of 3 really terrific women that I'm looking forward to engaging in a conversation with tomorrow evening. It is free to the public. It starts at 6:30. I also want to say, if you have not already heard, we are very pleased by the recent report that came out that listed Ossining as one of the safest communities in the country. We are 29 in the country. There were actually only 2 communities in the Hudson Valley that were identified, and this was looking at communities with a population of 25,000 or more. So kudos to the Ossining Police Department for their consistent enforcement. And also want to say thank you to everyone, all of our residents, all of our businesses who invest in our community and make it such a welcoming place. And we are going in a really great direction. And along those lines, I recently spoke with someone who was opening a business in Ossining, and she had looked around to a number of communities in different spaces, and she knows Ossining. She's not a resident, but she has a connection to it. And one of the things that was a factor in her consideration was the tree lights. When she was here in the evening, it made her feel safe and welcome, and that there was stuff happening. So, we don't always think of beautiful festivities, festive lights, as being a safety factor, but sometimes that can really make a difference. So I was delighted to hear about that really tangible impact. And one other thing that I will comment on, because some folks have asked questions about it in the community and more broadly, is the New York State Comptroller's audit that came out in the last week. We were very pleased by the work that our Treasurer's Office, our Treasurer and our Deputy Treasurer did in facilitating that process. And we are also very pleased that village and town staff have already met, and it looks like we're moving in a good direction. And we hope that this report is a helpful tool to being able to recoup some of the parking revenue that has been inaccessible to us to this point. One of the unintended consequences of the dissolving of the village court in 2011, which took effect in 2012, is that all of the parking tickets become the property of the town court, and the village needs to get those back so that we can send them out to collections so that we can recoup all of that revenue for the residents. So we're optimistic that that may happen now. So that's a good thing for all of us. Any further comments on that? I know, Debbie, you were instrumental in the most recent conversation. You feel good about it? All right.
Just a quick question, because you brought up the tree lights. Are we still looking for donors or sponsors for the tree wells?
Yes.
That's still an ongoing program?
About half of them, I think, still are in need of a name.
Okay.
199 for 2 years, is that right?
I do not have the
Yeah.
numbers because
Is that
You're right.
Yeah. For a 2-year sponsorship, and it really helps with maintaining them.
Great. And you can find the information for that on the website, correct? Very good. All right. Madam Manager.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased this evening to introduce Jerry Fiella, who is representing the Sing Sing Museum. He and his team have put a lot of effort into pulling together this museum, and it's just going to be a really exciting thing for our community and a great economic benefit and boom. So I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Fiella and ask him if there's anything I can do for your presentation. Just let me know.
I think we're pretty good. There is a PowerPoint that we'll use later on in the discussion.
So
Okay.
you want to just get right into the PowerPoint?
I don't want to, we're going to go into this first. First of all, I want to thank you all for inviting us here tonight. With me tonight is Dana White, who, as you all know, is our village historian, is also sitting as a member of the Sing Sing Prison Museum Board of Directors. My name is Jerry Fiella. I am the Executive Director of Historic Hudson River Towns, and I've also been engaged now with the museum project for the last 3-4 years, and I'm starting to do some work for them as their project administrator. In addition to Dana and myself, I wanted to mention to the board that we've engaged the services of Dr. Brent Glass. He is the Director Emeritus of the Smithsonian Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., who's been helping us for the last 3 years. Nancy Gold, who is the media specialist with HHRT, has been working on the project. Tracy Corbett, who's the senior planner at Westchester County Department of Planning, has been with us. If you recall, the county was involved with this project up until 2009, then it stopped, and now she is back with us with her vast knowledge and institutional information on this project. And of course, it would be complete if I didn't mention all of our friends in our network that have been helping us throughout this process get started and move along, and we keep relying back on them for various elements to move things forward. So Madam Mayor, members of the board, Stuart, Deborah, thank you all. Jamie, thank you all for having us here tonight. HHRT got involved in the project back in 2016. I provided for you all a memo. It's several pages long, but don't look at it now. I'm going to summarize it here, and you can read it at your leisure tonight as you want to try to get to sleep. So we were involved in the project in 2016, and we were asked to submit a consolidated funding application to the Regional Economic Development Council back then, and that resulted in a $250,000 award to get the project started, okay, which was very, very important. So we picked up from where the county left off in 2009. We started to update the story, update the data and the information, and start to bring this thing forward to see whether or not this was a feasible program that that had legs and could stand on its own. With that grant funding, we were able to hire Dr. Glass, and then we were also commissioned Lord Cultural Resources to conduct the feasibility report, which if you go on our website at www.singsingprisonmuseum.org, you will see the report in its entirety. And certain pieces of it I included in the agenda packet that I provided to you. The Lord report and the work that they did here for 9 months, engaging the community, a lot of the partnership organizations, helped us to define what the purpose was behind the museum. And in that report, I'm going to quote what they have said. It says, "The Sing Sing Prison Museum will challenge visitors to think beyond preconceived ideas of the criminal justice system via engaging exhibitions that capture the essence of what it means to be part of the correction system and educational programs that allow visitors to feel connected to staff, prisoners. The museum will have a positive impact on prisoners, workers, victims, and their families." It became a lot more than just a museum with exhibits under glass. It has a tremendous purpose. And John Conyers, who was a former resident of Sing Sing, who was involved in the Hudson Link program, stated, and this is in the report too, rather than talking about old Sparky, he says, "I hope that the Sing Sing Museum will be known for providing the spark of education." John is a graduate of the Hudson Link program, who is now a strategic partner with us in this project, along with Rehabilitation to the Art and several other larger groups. The Lord report also gave us a business plan on what it was going to take to operate this museum, gave us a capital estimate of what the construction costs would look like, and also a strategy on how to start to involve multiple partners in the project. So this was beginning to develop into something that was very interesting. Like I said, far more than a bunch of artifacts under glass, but a place where we like to think of it now as I'll call it, quote, a site of conscience, okay? And there is an organization that deals with these sites of conscience, so that this facility becomes a hub for the continued dialogue on the current issues of criminal justice that are pervasive today in our society. And in doing this at Sing Sing, through the lens of Sing Sing, with that brand name, with the powerful history that this facility has, becomes a very interesting combination. Unknowns to many other places around. Nobody has those three elements being combined in one spot. So right after the Lord report was done in September 2016, we started to create a board of directors. And in May of 2017, we received the charter from the New York State Department of Education as an educational facility. And right now we have our 501c3 application pending with the IRS. The mission for the museum is it will inspire, inform, and reflect on the history of punishment and rehabilitation in the American penal system through the lens of the Sing Sing Correctional Facility. Through its exhibitions, collections, and programs, the museum will provide a forum for the examination of historic and contemporary issues in the criminal justice system, their social, political, and cultural impact. The board has also adopted 4 goals for this project, and they are to be the best prison museum in the United States, to become a leader in the national conversation on criminal justice, to have a positive impact on the economic development in Ossipee and in the region, and to have a positive impact on the lives of the prisoners, prison workers, victims, and their families. The museum board is now 13 members strong. We're continuing to build it and become a very a diverse organization with many people representing various areas on the board. And we've started to divide the board up into a number of subcommittees that are each charged with various aspects of building this museum. So we are well on our way from a standpoint of our governance. So now comes the hard part, the show me the money piece. After receiving that first $250,000 grant from Empire State Development, Senator David Cartolucci was able to secure for us a $100,000 EDAP grant that we used to hire the architectural preservation firm of Jan Hein Picorni. And Assemblywoman Galiff had secured previously under the CCAP program a $1 million grant that was initially going to be awarded to the County of Westchester when they were involved in the program back in 2009. And that $1 million was to be used for actual brick and mortar work at the facility. The ESD grant, Empire State Development Grant, if I use an acronym, please correct me so I spell it out for everybody. The Empire State Development Grant required a local match, and usually the state does not allow a grant to be used for one state grant to use another state grant as a match. However, in this particular case, Empire State Development permitted that, which was very helpful to us, and they allowed that CCAP grant of $1 million that Sandy Galiff got to be the match as well. So they're all tight. So the expenditure of the first $1 million on the project, plus the EDAP grant of $100,000, and the expenditure of the $250, they're all kind of tied together. The funding for this project got very complicated, and I'll try to get into that in a minute. So here's what happened. The Economic Development Assistance Program, that $100,000 grant, was initially awarded to historic Hudson River towns. And we ran into a grant requirement that said, in order for the Dormitory Authority to facilitate the grant, we needed to have adequate site control. Okay, so we got a letter from the commissioner, Acting Commissioner Anthony Annucci, that said, we will transfer title to the village. There was a letter from the mayor indicating that we would transfer title, or we would lease or provide the building to HHRT or its successor organization to operate the museum. So we had a chain of command for site control. Well, the Dormitory Authority said, well, that's not adequate. Our regulations say you have to have a lease or title. That's all they would go by. And I had the conversation with them, and I said, you know, the reason you want site control is to make sure that you don't make an award to an organization or somebody who then turns around and sells the building. I said, you own the building. It's your building. It's owned by the state of New York. That still wasn't adequate enough. So Stuart and I took a ride up to Albany. We had a meeting with the Dormitory Authority, Empire State Development, Department of Corrections, OGS, you name it, every attorney in the state of New York was on the phone call. And we ended up resolving the issue by the Dormitory Authority saying, if the Department of Corrections or Office of General Services, OGS, will give a lease to the village, they would in turn rechannel the EDAP $100,000 grant to the village. And they felt that was adequate for site control because the village would have the lease of the building. So last year, we worked to do that. The village board approved that. That grant has now been filed successfully. That's good. Another positive with that is while we had the contract with Janine Pokorny to do the preservation work based upon the initial award letter to HHRT, the Dormitory Authority allowed us to do two things. Number one, amend the agreement to allow Janine Pokorny to do the conceptual connection of the corridor that links the powerhouse to the 1825 cell block, which was a major issue for access, and to also have the village and historic Hudson River towns enter into a memorandum of understanding that allows HHRT to still act as your agent so that we don't have to start from scratch with Pokorny. Okay, so we can so what we've done now is we've picked up right where we left off. Pokorny is back on the project. We've had the meetings with the Department of Corrections. They've met with the board. We've talked about this preservation work, which is Sandy's initial $1 million. We've talked about now the rehabilitation, which I'm going to talk about next. And we've had 2 meetings with the Department of Corrections on building the corridor, what that conceptual design has to look like, and what elements the Department of Corrections wants to see in that corridor to ensure that anybody who's in as a visitor can't get out, and anybody who's in as an inmate can't get in. That's very important to them. As I said to us, they're not in the hospitality business, but the commissioner is very supportive of the project, and we were told that we want to make this happen. So that was a what do you call it? A wow moment or something like that? I forget. There's a term for it. I can't remember what it is.
Jerry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but should we be putting on the slides, or were you?
No, the slides are coming in because
Okay,
that's
right.
just going to explain where the project is. A few things. So we're very happy now to act as the agent and to keep Janine Pokorny on the project. And Mike Devonshire and Kurt Hirschberg have been here several times. And I just want to read something that Mike Devonshire wrote about the powerhouse, which is illustrated in those posters. He stated to us that the powerhouse presents itself as a near-perfect building for adaptive reuse as an interpretive and educational center. The soaring spaces, light entry points, and proximity to the cell block make this an ideal center from which to view and interpret the site. This is an amazing wealth of building that you possess. So that was the architect's interpretation of this after they had climbed through every bit of it and came out with the preservation specifications.
I just want to offer folks who may not realize what building it is we're talking about. If you anybody who's ever gone down to Lewis Engle Park, you go down to the train station, all the parking spots that are between the train tracks and Lewis Engle Park, if you're standing in the middle of those parking spots and you look south, you'll see this really tall building. I don't know, it is like
It's almost 6 stories in height.
right.
Right.
And it used to be the powerhouse.
Mhm.
It looks like a really industrial building. It hasn't
Yes.
been active in a long time, but it's very stable, and that's what all of these reports were able to indicate to us. And that building is actually just on the outside of the wall, but on the prison grounds.
And I do have a slide at the end. I'll show you.
We'll get to see it.
We're going to see. We're going to show you. We're going to
Anybody
show you
can
the
go take
relation.
a look at it, though, is
We're
my
gonna show you
point.
the
The next
relation
time
of how
you're
well
on the
fits
west
together,
side
right.
of the village, go check it out.
So, as I mentioned before, that CCAP grant that the Empire State Development allowed us to use as the match for the initial 250, that was awarded in 2009 to the county. Then it was moved to HHRT. But as a result of this major powwow that Stuart and I had with everybody that was available to be on a phone call at the state level, Sandy Galiff was able to move that into the SAM grant program. That's the state aid to municipalities. It cannot go to a not-for-profit. It can only go to a municipal jurisdiction, and the village has agreed to be the recipient of that. So that SAM grant now is in the name of the village, and we have filed for that first $1 million grant with the state. They have all the documentation for the SAM, and I'm waiting. I was just waiting, and on Friday I had a great conversation with Sandy, and we were able to pull together what I need to do now for the second SAM grant, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So let's fast forward from 2014 to 2016. HHRT submitted a second application under the Consolidated Funding Program to the state of New York, and we were awarded an ESD grant of $500,000 for capital work on the building. Okay. Now that capital work had a grant match of another $2 million. It only can fund 20% of the project. We had to come up with $2 million. So this is where the project really started to get a little weird, because while we were having these conversations with the state, we were advised by bond counsel to ESD that the $2 million that we had to use to match that 500, we could not raise it from private funds. When Empire State Development issues bonds for correctional facility improvements, Stuart, you got to correct me if I get wrong on this. Those bonds have a requirement that you cannot use private funds for any capital work inside the correctional facility. It's considered a gift, and it jeopardizes the tax-exempt status of the bonds. So with that in hand, we thought we had a major issue, but we ended up turning lemons into the lemonade. We went back to Empire State Development and said, look, you allowed it the first time. Can we use another SAM grant to be the match for this? And they said yes. And Sandy Galiff, again, was able to get us the second SAM for $1.375 million, which is the paperwork I'm putting in. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And now we're trying, the goal is to raise $625,000, which is what the museum board is working to do right now. The $625,000 will go towards the soft costs of the project, because it's not capital, it's not brick and mortar. And we can use it for selecting an exhibit museum design firm. We can have them work to help us build what we want to call a preview center, which I'll talk about in a minute. And that's a task that the museum board has taken on, and we're in the process of doing that this year. And we're going to talk a little bit about that when I show you the timeline chart. So when we got this bad news that we couldn't raise this money and we couldn't use privately raised funds for the capital improvement on the property, on the powerhouse yet, we were able to get around that. We had our conversations. The state's accepted that opportunity for us, so we're still moving forward. At some particular point, the village will have the lease with the building, and then at some point, when title gets changed over and then turned into the hands of the museum board to operate, then private funding is fine, okay, because it's out of the correction facility piece. I should mention, so what I'm going to do next is we had the second SAM grant to file for the $1.375 million. And on Friday when I was talking to Sandy, what happened was the state took the 3.75 and attached it to the first $1 million SAM grant. Okay? So the 1.375 is now already in place. So the second SAM grant will be just for $1 million. So it's going to look like you have two $1 million grants, but in fact you have the 2015 funding is 1.375, and the 2017 will be the second million. That gives us 2.375 million plus the 500,000 ESD grant to HHRT for a combined immediate program of 2.875 million to start the project, which is going to move us down the pike, which I'm going to show you in a minute. In addition to those grants and that funding, we've also raised about $150,000 in private donations from individuals and foundations, and we've received well over about $350,000 in in-kind services from law firm of Philip Neiser, Westchester County, Historic Hudson River Towns. The village has been providing us legal assistance, financial assistance, and guidance through Public Works as well. So all totaled, there's a tremendous effort to really make this happen from all parties. It's been really, really wonderful. We did receive a grant from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. We received 2 grants from the Westchester Community Foundation as well to help move this project along. The second grant was for $40,000 to actually start to develop a criminal justice program in the high school in conjunction with the programming that would take place at the museum. And they're very excited about that. And Brent Glantz is working with the superintendent and the deputy superintendents to make that happen. Okay, so now let's go to the PowerPoint.
Grab the bourbon ones, diaslates.
I provided you tonight with a new timeline, okay? So please disregard the earlier one that you had received with the agenda packet because this new one is a little bit more complete and it's been reviewed by the museum board as well. Okay, here we go. So this is the building that the powerhouse will be located in. As the mayor indicated, if you cross the tracks and come over down by the railroad, and you look immediately to your south, you will see this tall building standing there. It doesn't look anything like this right now. Those windows are boarded up. The middle door where it says Sing Sing Museum is now opened up as a garage entrance, and so is the other window to the right-hand side. It's used as their mechanical facility. But this would become the major building for the museum. All told, when you start to put floors in and start to arrange it, we have about 30 to 35,000 square feet of space, which is excellent, we think, for the standpoint of building out this museum. What you see behind you, those posters, those were what we call balloon diagrams of potentially how the space could be divided and created. The first poster is the first floor of the building, and that large gray area to the back that everybody's looking at is about 5,000 square feet. That's the floor print of the tower section of the building, okay? The second is a cross section. The third is a three-dimensional view, kind of depicting what would look like if we did a recreation of the current cell block A or B inside to give a person an indication of what's there today. And this last one that shows the 3 floors is the breakdown of what those 3 elevations would look like in the museum. Again, this is conceptual at this time. We're moving it forward to greater detail, our next steps, but it starts to show how the layout and how things might start to fit in the project. What do I need to do here? Just there we go. Okay, there we go. Okay. At the top of the slide, you see the 1936 powerhouse where the museum is, and towards the bottom, can everybody see it? At the bottom, you see 2 buildings of interest. Number 1 is the 1825 cell block, which currently today stands as just a 4-wall ruination. Okay, the building, the roof burned down in the 70s? 80s. The roof burned out in the 80s. It's just a shell at this particular point in time. But the architectural firm of Jan Hein Pokorny went through it, and believe it or not, it's extremely stable. It hasn't moved at all. It's very, very, very structurally in place. Next to it, that large brick building with the white roof, that is the Warner Gymnasium. That was built by the Warners as a donation to the prison when they filmed so many movies here. We will not be in that building. That is not. We will not have the use. And what you see between the powerhouse building and the 1825 cell block is the connecting corridor. This connecting corridor, this is just a very quick depiction of what it is. It's about 350 feet long. We're not exactly sure what the width, and we're not exactly sure of the final location, but we've had several meetings with the Department of Corrections to talk about the parameters for constructing that. And once we put all those parameters together, they would then give us what we'll call conceptual approval of how this would be constructed. That corridor would also contain certain exhibits and elements of the museum. But once you come through that wall across the top there, where it says proposed gateway up at the top, you are now entering the secure portion of the prison. Okay, so you've actually penetrated the security. Inside the 1825 cell block will be a recreation of the existing facility. Okay, and at the end of it, it will be secured so that people will be able to view the entire cell block. There's the powerhouse in its earlier days when there was a smokestack there and was actually being used. And as you can see, that's where it looked like when it had windows. That's the same depiction that's up here on the poster. And that is the 1825 cell block. That's the view taken from the parking structure that's down at the end of Hunter Street. And this is the interior of the cell block as it exists today. That doorway at the far end, that garage doorway at the far end, is how we would access the 1825 cell block. We would come in, we're not exactly sure, 60, maybe 100 feet, depending upon what we need to create the proper exhibit. But the exhibit of the old cell block will be internal, and it will not touch the outside ruination. We do not want to disturb this. The only thing we would probably want to do to this building is make sure there's no loose material that can hurt anybody. Probably put some kind of a cap on the top of this so that the water penetration doesn't go through those blocks and continuously disintegrate it, and keep it in its original ruination form. If you haven't been in it and you would like to, please let me know, because we do schedule tours of this building once or twice a month through the auspices of Mike Capra. And I will tell you, when you get in here, this is an extremely powerful presence. Okay, people have walked in here, and when they walk out, they say they get goosebumps. It's that strong a building, and we want to convey that image and convey that to the visitor as well, so they feel the sense of what this was like. I meant to bring with me tonight the map of an 1825 cell block, and of course I forgot it. I left it in my car. It's in the repair shop. The original cell blocks were 3 feet 3 inches wide, 7 feet long, 6.5 feet high, and in some cases they had 2 men in a cell block. We believe this is the largest structural building that was built in the United States in 1825, larger than the U.S. Capitol. So volumetrically, this might have been, when they called it the Big House, this was the Big House in the United States. So there's a lot of provenance to this facility that we think needs to be exhibited. What's very interesting, when we do bring people down for tours, a lot of times the correction officers that are on the gate post just outside this building have never seen the inside of it, and when they do, they are amazed by it as well. So when you think all the jail cells were all the cell blocks were back to back in the middle corridor, there was a catwalk, and then an opening between that catwalk and the cell block. If you go over to the exhibit at the community center, you can kind of see how it was constructed. So the timeline. What's highlighted in yellow are the elements that the village board and staff will need to be involved in to get the project moving. And as you can see here, the first thing would be the lease of the powerhouse with the Department of Corrections. It might be with OGS. We're not exactly sure yet, because they told us they're not exactly sure who actually owns it. But one of those agencies will probably provide us with the lease. They have given us a draft that Stewart has that we've looked at that they've used in another facility, so we're not starting from scratch. Then there's the memorandum of understanding between HHRT and the village for the use of that EDAP grant. This way, the HHRT can continue to act as the agent, keep the project moving, and likewise in reverse, the ESD grant that we have, since we want to marry that up with the SAM grants for the construction project, we'll flip that around in the reverse the same way as we do with the EDAP grant. We do want to come before the village for a conditional use permit. The building department we've discussed with the building department the issuance of a permit to do the preservation and the rehabilitation work on the project, and we are in the process of finishing up our seeker. We've done the long form, we've done a traffic analysis, and we've got the economic impact analysis all done to come before everybody with. Under item number 2, D and E, as you see here, that is the stabilization and the renovation project. There's 2 components to this. One is the preservation piece, to make sure the building is sound, doesn't leak any more water, that the roofs are intact, the flashings and the skylights are all in place. Then there's the rehabilitation. That involves replacing some of those plywood fascias with their windows that were there initially, replacing the doors, replacing windows downstairs, fixing the building up so that a portion of the first floor of the powerhouse becomes occupiable by the museum. Our goal during 2019 and into 2020 is to develop this preview center, so that if you look at that first picture behind Trustee Levin, if you look at that first piece there, the portion of the building on the side where it says administrative offices and classroom and the bathrooms, that area there, which is about 3,000 square feet, would constitute the preview center. Okay, this way, when we start to bring people in to the building for potential donors to fund the build out, we actually can show them the storyline, show them some exhibitry, and give them a better understanding of what the purpose behind the museum is. And we think that'll help. The balance of this is the museum exhibit design under item number 3. This is where I talked about the $625,000 being used to hire a well-qualified architectural exhibit design team, and that would be a team that we would hope to have on board by October, November of 2018, and that will continue on as a long-term relationship with them as we continue to design and build out the facility. Okay, and then the site connectivity, wayfinding. At some particular point in time, we're going to want to assign this so people can find it. Okay, the last point here is the schematic design of the corridor. As I said, Picorni, we amended that initial contract for them to do that work, and they already had meetings with the Department of Corrections. We're hoping that by April or May we'll have a conceptual layout that the Department of Corrections will say this is okay, this is good to use. And once we do that, we do want to go talk to the governor's office about how this project is now moving forward and how it's starting to really develop legs, and that we're going to actually go out to bid and actually have a ribbon cutting ceremony sometime. Let me go back here. Sometime in June or July of this particular year. And the rest of this, I won't get into all of it, details about community conversations, but we want to continue with our awareness building throughout the community. Last year we had 6 discussions in the libraries. Dana White was instrumental in putting that all together. Dana's also been giving presentations. We're up in Newburgh last week. She's doing historical societies. We are building a lot of awareness and understanding of what this project is about. And if you want, there you go. There's our website. We have an office now at Main Street, 127 Main Street. We have an email address at Gmail. So we're really starting to get ourselves structured. I just want to leave everybody and summarize a couple of quick things here. In the economic impact analysis of the project and in the Lord report, we estimated that to be about 130,000 visitors a year. And they estimated about 40% of them would be arriving by train. So we've also been having discussions with our local partners at how we bring people up into the village, how we engage them, how we not only market just the museum, but also talk about the aqueduct, you know, the Crescent area, how we talk about Jug Tavern, and even Marino as a potential site for people to come up and visit and go through the Killbrook and everything. So we've had a couple of those discussions, and we have some reports on that we're holding that hopefully we're going to get to in a very short period of time. But I just want everybody to be aware that the construction project alone will generate between 320 and 431 years of direct and indirect employment. So that's a person per year. So that's how that works. In other words, if you have 100 people working there, you know, for a period of time, that's what the calculation comes out to. And it would create between 220 to 236 new jobs, both on an indirect and both on a direct and indirect basis in the Westchester area. All right. Direct site and offsite spending would be $5.7 million, and if you add that to, direct site and offsite spending, when you add the indirect and induced spending, it goes up to $26 to $30 million. So it's a very large and important project for the region as well as just the village, to how we tie this together. But interestingly enough, I just want to leave you with one other thought, and that is, while the economic impacts of the project are important, the benefit of this program cannot be measured in dollars alone. I think that would be an injustice to the project. As I said, we had several of these conversations around the Westchester area through the library system this year, and we had several very prominent people come in and be part of those programs. One of the gentlemen that spoke was Morton Horn, who was a lecturer at John Jay College and a former commissioner of corrections for the city of New York. And his statement is that Sing Sing is the quintessential representation of American prisons. It brings us back to the very roots of the way in which we punish people and administer criminal justice in the United States. It takes us back to the beginning of the country. And Mike Capra, who's the superintendent, who's been extremely supportive of the project, who's really interested in us making sure that we have space for reentry programming and some of the other components that he feels are critical to bringing the men in the facility back into society. I just want to read his statement from him. He said, "When the public thinks about prisons, they associate it with punishment. When I think about prison, I associate it with structure, security, discipline, education, vocation, and families. I spend many hours thinking about putting 1,700 broken pieces back together so when they leave this place, they will be prepared to be productive, educated, confident, employed, crime-free people." I think it's a very powerful statement from our superintendent. He's been most supportive of the product in many, many ways. We're extremely lucky to have him here. And the other night, sorry if I'm going on too long, and the other night, Roger Panetta, who's been with this project when the county was involved, came and spoke to the museum board, reflecting on four international conferences that he's attended, talking about the issue of prison museums, and he presented at several of them. And he talked about the voices, the memory of those people associated with the facility, the move to educate people in the criminal justice system and the penal system. And he said one of the only ways you can really learn through the experience is to visit the museum, and what makes ours so extraordinary is the name and the fact that it's still in use. So I'm going to close with that, and I want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank you for your support on this project. I wanted you to be aware of the pending decisions that the board will be involved with going forward, but I just think this is an extremely exciting and transformative project for this village. Thank you. Any questions?
Sure. Thank you, Jerry. I'm glad you were able to. A lot has happened since the last time you were here, so it was valuable for us to get back up to speed before we are faced with having some decisions to make, because we can see that there will be some special use permits and such coming our way for consideration. So this is helpful for us to wrap our heads around it at this stage. I have the privilege of sitting on the board as an ex officio member, so even though I did miss the last meeting, but I tend to be a little bit more up to date, so I'll let my colleagues comment or ask questions first.
Jerry?
Yes.
Thanks. Sorry, lost my voice here. Are you getting closer to sort of a date of rolling out the whole project?
Yes, we are. Right now, we finally, like I said, by getting all of the funding back in place last year and spending a lot of time with that, I think we're at a point right now where this chart, we want to, the newer chart that I gave you,
Got it.
we want to continue to work that and keep, this is a plan. We want to keep working this plan. So right now, our immediate goal is to get Pecorian to finish the plans and specifications for preservation and rehabilitation, get that in front of the board, get the plans and specifications out to bid, and go out to bid and actually have a ribbon cutting this year, so people see positive progress, brick and mortar progress on the building. Once we do that, and then again, raise this 625 that we need, which we're in the process of doing, to bring the exhibit designer in, that's another milestone for the project. So with those two things moving forward, and then getting a preview center up, I think we're going to start to see it really take off. It's the first one or two big donations that are the hardest to come by, and we've got a lot of nets out there right now, and we keep working that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, Jerry, it's Herculean, at the very least, that you've really soldiered on here, even through some periods where things didn't look so good. So thanks for persevering. Thanks for not giving up. It would have been easy to walk away from this, but you really brought it to a great place. And just as far as I'm concerned, just let us know how we can help. A phone call, even the smallest thing that'll, herd the cats here.
Appreciate that.
Your whole scenario, working with the dormitory authority and everything else, that in and of itself is an example of just your getting all the folks to the table to get them to come to an understanding and move things forward. So thank you for a great effort.
I don't want to take a lot of credit for that because Chuck Lesnick was very instrumental in helping us pull that together and bringing all those parties in for a meeting. And Stuart was kind enough to give me the day to go up. I bought him lunch, but we had a great discussion on the project, and we talked a lot about a lot of those things. But we had a very positive conversation. And in those particular cases, John, it's always best to see somebody face to face. And it was interesting because Charlie Kelly is the assistant to the commissioner, and he was one of the gentlemen that Stuart and I met with that day we were up there. And then when we had to start the conversations about the corridor, Charlie Kelly was the gentleman who came back down here to have that conversations. And having that face-to-face up in Albany and giving him our case document and telling him where we are with the project only helped, I think, foster those discussions about the corridor. So Department of Corrections has been great. They've been really helpful with stuff. Mike Capper's been wonderful. Whenever we can get in for a tour, he helps us facilitate that. And of course, staff here has been great too. So it's a real effort on a lot of people's part.
Any other questions or comments from the board? And I'll just say, Dana White didn't speak today, but as you mentioned, she was one of the folks who was part of the presentations that were done at libraries around the county to tell folks about this project. And she's one of the team members that makes up the Sing Sing Prison Museum Board, which is just a really impressive group of dedicated, talented people that come from a lot of different life experiences and really bring a lot to the table. And we all see Jerry and are amazed by all that he does, and he's very fortunate to be working with a board that is so talented and dedicated. It's really impressive to watch. So,
Thank you.
And it's been mentioned that Stuart has been very helpful from the village. Thank you, Stuart, for all the time that you have helped to facilitate this. Obviously, we have an integral role to play here, so it's very helpful for us to know that you are working at this at every step. And Tom, you are part of this now, and you're going to be part of this for quite some time to come as all of these grants are facilitated through your office. So thank you, and to your staff.
And again, they've been wonderful with access and picking up the phone and having a phone call and time together. It's been great.
Great. You talk about
you,
the
Dan.
mission having 4 pieces, one of them being being the #1 prison museum in the country, and then the next being being a leader in criminal justice, the third being an economic driver for locally and for the region, and then the other being having a beneficial impact on the lives of everyone who was touched by the prison, either as an inmate or a family or a victim or a staff member there. And to me, I think of the first part of the mission just being essential to accomplish the others, and numbers 2 and 4 really speak to my heart, but number 3 really I take as my responsibility as an ex officio member, and I appreciate that you have been so responsive to concerns that I've raised, particularly when we talk about how are we going to get this 130,000 people to not just clog up our roads and go to the museum, but then to welcome them into our whole community so that there are as many of these economic benefits to us locally as possible. And the museum board has been really progressive in thinking about that. So I know that's an integral part of the plan, and it's very important to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much for your time tonight. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Did you have a final question there? Or are you okay?
Just wanted to say thank you, Jerry.
You're
And
very
to the
welcome.
board. Thank you.
Okay, great.
All right. Staff brought in a few more chairs, so there's a couple of chairs here if there's other people that would like to sit down.
Do you want to take your boards?
I can leave those boards and I'll pick them up tomorrow morning because I need them for
Okay.
tomorrow for the tour. Is that
Okay,
okay?
got it.
So
Sure.
I'll leave the box there and I'll just leave those there. If anybody wants to look at them, and then tomorrow morning, Jamie,
Okay. Or I can bring them.
No, I'm going to get them there. I got to get the
Okay.
keys and stuff. But thank you, Dan.
All
I
right.
appreciate it.
I believe we have some folks who are coming up from the Downtown Development Fund Council next. I see they're in the back
I
of the room. It's a
do
little
believe
crowded,
so.
so
John?
Looks like we have one.
3 degrees.
yes, everyone is very excited about your presentation, John. If you're somebody who's standing, please find a seat as we are transitioning between items here. Welcome, John.
Well, glad to be back.
And I'll just give a shout out when I was referencing the tree light program that was so inviting to a future investor in a local downtown business. It was the Downtown Development Fund Council. In fact, I think that was the first big initiative that you offered us as a project that you wanted the village to undertake and to use this fund to implement. And you've done it, and it's beautiful, and it has tangible and intangible impact. So thank you for that.
Well, our pleasure. Clearly, first of all, I'd like to say that Karen would have liked to have been here.
So before you get started, I just want to recuse myself from the conversation, obviously because
You're not here.
okay.
Okay, we recognize
You are a
that.
member of the community who is not weighing in as a board member at the moment. Thank you. And the reason for that is because Quantel is employed by IFGA, and we're going to be discussing a project that
Okay.
involves this.
So Karen DeTore is sorry that she can't be here, but she's basically at home with a fever.
We must all have the same.
I think you all have the same
stuff.
thing. Just
Oh,
keep
that's all right.
keep it away from me. So I will kind of do a very brief presentation as to why we're recommending this. So DDFC is pleased to recommend the expenditure of $4,000 for IFCA's Broad Avenue charrette. So what they want to, essentially what IFCA wants to do is look at the Broad Avenue section of town and really explore it in terms of what its development potential is, but what the possibilities are, and how that integrates with both housing and affordable housing and economic viability of that section. So they're really looking at it, how the two kind of interact with each other and integrate with each other, so not one without the other. I think there are several reasons why this project is important. One is that it reflects part of the it reflects one of the DR, the Downtown Redevelopment Working Committee's recommendations, which is to do a charrette for the entire downtown central business district. This project has a focused kind of a focused geography to it, and as such, I think it will serve as a very effective prototype for what might follow on in a more comprehensive way. So that we found that kind of very exciting, in that we can test this out, we can see how it works, and then hopefully move it to a broader area. So the Broad Avenue District, the other reason why this is important is that the Broad Avenue District is gaining attention from other development projects. The potential, some of them are kind of in the works, potential, and others are actually happening. So, for example, the Children's Center has bought property on Spring Street, and they're developing State Street, and they're developing that property on State Street. And the Hudson Step project is still pending, a lot of negotiations, but eventually something's going to happen there, and that's going to start changing the dynamic of that neighborhood for sure. And the other, I think, reason that this is very important is that it's really demonstrating a synergy between the public sector and the private not-for-profit sector, and showing how these two sectors can work together to really kind of leverage each other and play upon each other's strengths, but yet get more done than either one could do on their own. So I think for these three reasons, this is a very kind of important and a very viable project, and something that the Downtown Fund Committee really recommends that the village approve the funds for that. That's about all I have to say. The amount, $4,000. So this is an $8,000 project. We're recommending $4,000 to be contributed by the village from this fund. So this is a fund that was given to the village by the Ginsberg Corporation as part of the Hudson, whatever their Harbor Square project. So it's part of that project. So it's kind of a dedicated fund that's here for leveraging economic development projects and economic development of the community. So
Thank you, John.
that's my pitch.
I'm in favor of this.
Omar, did you want
Thank
to
you, John.
comment?
No, just thank you.
Okay.
I think it's a wonderful project. I'm very excited about. Oh, you'd want?
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
So, when I'm a liaison to this committee, so I am a big proponent of citizen-driven committees across the community. This is one of them. Highly effective, small, but highly effective. Ones that did the trees, the wells, the beautification. But for those of you that follow our meetings, there are a number of other projects that they have brought to our attention. This came in a different way, a little bit more unusual. The charrette was the idea from a different citizens group that was formed with the government. So the three pieces here is it's a non-for-profit, it's the government being involved, as well as it's the public-private, but with government as well. The thing that I like about this is that charrettes have, not only is it a stakeholder, I don't know if everybody knows what a charrette is, it's a bunch of stakeholders intensely looking at design together and coming to an agreement. This is a consulting group. I also think that Broad Avenue needs a lot of tender loving care. It's smack in the downtown, which is what this citizens group is really charged with recommending for changes. It involves affordable housing, which I think is the most important piece of all of this, along with looking at businesses down there. So it's a real, it's got like everything that we're about and everything that I think we're interested in improvements. We hope that it'll fit into the larger plan. That's an important part that when I spoke to Karen and I think she believes in that we have a comprehensive plan. So this will also go hand in glove, we think. Otherwise, not sure it's not a ton of money, and it's money that citizens really believe this to be a good use. But I also like the fact that somebody's really taken a stake in it, that it's not one individual, but it's a highly respected group along with government. You guys are going to be working on it. So, no, I mean, obviously I'm in support of it. I think it's a great piece. I hope it gets going quickly. And I think the request from us is only 4,000, so I'm in support of it, obviously.
It's small. So some of the members of the Downtown Redevelopment Working Committee, the DRWC, for those who like the alphabets, did sit down with Karen as well. So it's actually two committees, plus IFCA, plus plus the village. So it's very much we're all talking together because we're all actually pulling in the same direction. Thank you.
So, did you want to comment on it, Debbie?
I think that Rika pointed out that, there are a lot of initiatives. We're going to talk about that later in the agenda. But this fits so perfectly with so many of those things that we're going to be doing, so that I think it'll be really money well spent up front to help drive some of those other things that we want to do. So I'm very excited about partnering with them on this.
I agree. I think it's a great way to get a lot of bang for our buck. $4,000 of village expense with sort of a minimal amount of staff time. We'll have an involvement in this, but all the legwork to set it up and the driving force is coming from a nonprofit and from volunteers, and obviously we'll participate. And I'm delighted to be part of this and to have this partnership, which is a new way of exploring how we want to develop our downtown. And I think it'll be a really valuable product that comes out of it. That's going to be something that'll be valuable for us in our comprehensive plan analysis. And it really also not only does it further the recommendations from the Downtown Redevelopment Working Committee report from last summer, but it also speaks particularly to policy objective strategy number 4 from the Housing Needs Assessment, which talks about reaching out to other funding sources and other affordable housing developers. And when we look at some of the stakeholders that are being considered for or suggested for the different groups that are going to be part of this charrette, this is a really great way to invite some of those new voices and investors and resources into a really constructive conversation. So thank you very much for presenting it.
And the last, I'd like to make one more comment, and that's, some people might say, why Broad Avenue? Broad Avenue is sort of over there and downtown's over here, but the reality is that Broad Avenue is a very important counterpoint to the downtown. It's a street that's been really under-recognized for its architectural potential as a very broad street with some interesting buildings on either side. So this is really the beginning of tying the entire downtown together. So we think it has a lot of potential.
And frankly, we've done
clarify, it is
yeah.
downtown, right? I mean,
It is. It is the
It is-
southern
it is
border
in the
of the
downtown. It is in the
formerly
downtown.
identified. Pardon? It's the southern border of the formerly identified downtown business, central business district, and we've done a lot of various studies on the main intersection at Spring and Main from a variety of lenses, and this really hasn't been done. So it'll be a really it's a good conversation to have, and it's a perfect time. So thank you for bringing it forward, and I'm looking forward to moving it forward. Do we need to pass a resolution for it, or
It'll be on the next agenda.
just to transfer the funds or whatever? And Aaron knows that.
Thank you.
Sounds pretty unanimous here. I don't hear any dissenting views.
Okay.
Thanks.
What's
Okay.
next?
So up next, we will be talking about the ETPA discussion. Lynn is here. And we have, yes. There we go. So, this is definitely for me a new idea because we never had this in any community I worked in before. So I've learned a lot about ETPA, and there's been a lot of research set my way so that I could better understand it. Stuart has spent a lot of time reviewing the legalities of ETPA, and Lynn has put together the process for us. I sent you earlier, and at your desks are a list of all of the properties that have 6 units or more that were built before 1974. That was given to us by the assessor.
You send it digitally or you
It's-
No, it's at your desk. It looks like this.
No,
We did get an email.
Oh,
We got the email.
I had the email.
wait.
Do you have a stack of them in front of you?
I must have a stack here
I
somewhere.
can look
Oh,
at the
yes.
email. It's not a big deal.
Okay, let's try this again. Take one and pass.
She's
All right, here we go. Thank you.
Minor glitch. So I'm going to turn it over to Lynn first so that she can talk about the process that we would need to go through in order to get to the point where the board would have to make a decision on what they want to do. So Lynn, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I did pass out your outline to all of them, so it'll be easier for you.
Okay. Thank you. Oh,
Is it the same thing that's
the
on this?
map. The map is
What's the map?
attached. We have a digital
map is
version if
attached.
you want, and I
Oh.
also brought the hard copy.
It's over here, right?
Right.
I mean, for the purposes of everybody in the room, it would probably be helpful if we put it up.
okay. It's the map is simply a breakout of the list
Uh-huh.
by sizes into categories ranging from 6 to 10 dwelling units, 11 to 20 dwelling units, 20 to 50 dwelling units, and then 50 plus.
Okay.
So to start the process, first of all, ETPA stands for the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, and it provides for, in New York State legislation, provides for rent stabilization, and it's predicated on a continuing housing emergency when there is a vacancy rate of 5% or less in a given community. And it provides for regulation of all multifamily dwelling units consisting of 6 units or more that were built pre-January 1 of 1974. So from the outline, I broke it out to a pretty simple 5-step process. First, this board, as a legislative body, has to make a determination about what size and class of buildings they want to regulate under the ETPA legislation. And by size, the 6 units or more, that number can change. It could be 10, it could be 20, it could be 100. That is a number that can be modified by this body. And the other determination is the class of the buildings. Do you only want to look at mixed-use buildings, so something that has retail or commercial on the bottom and residential on top, or just purely residential buildings, ones that are not owner-occupied, ones that exist only in certain zoning districts? Once we establish what we want to regulate, we would have to accomplish a vacancy study. And the best way to do that would be to send out an RFP, prepare an RFP of what we would look for. And then we would have to essentially go through the steps and pick a firm to do the vacancy study. and we would have to get, this was just a general list that we requested, but we would get an official list from the assessor, and then based on the determination of this board, we would eliminate properties that were ineligible or that couldn't be regulated or were eliminated by exceptions provided in the legislation. The firm would conduct a study, would analyze the results and determine the vacancy rate. And then if the vacancy rate is greater than 5%, it ends there. There is no option to look at ETPA. If it's less than 5%, this board can consider enacting the legislation. And once you guys make the determination if there is a vacancy rate of less than 5% that you'd like to enact ETPA, it has to be done via resolution. And once it's enacted, the village is basically hands-off. Everything's managed by New York State DHCR, the Department of Housing and Community Renewal. And they're the enforcement agency. They manage the leases, they manage the renewals, they manage when there's issues between the landlord and the tenant, when there's issues about deregulation. They're basically managing everything. So just some information based on the data that the assessor provided for the list that he provided. We broke out the, we broke it into 4 subcategories. Interestingly enough, in the 6 to 10 dwelling unit category, which is outlined by the pink dots, they're all over the village. They're primarily located in T-zone districts, which are 2-family districts. The VC district, which is the Village Center District. It's an older, smaller district. They're located in S75s, which are single-family zone districts. NC2, which is neighborhood commercial. PWC and PWB. And there's one located in MF district, which is a multifamily district. What's interesting, in that category, there are 47 buildings that have 6 units or more for a total of 332 dwellings in that category. Within the 11 to 20 size dwelling units, there are 13 buildings in the village, based on this list that the assessor provided, for a total of 176 dwelling units. And you primarily find those buildings located in zoning districts that are also a variety. PWB, single family S75, single family S50, the VC, the Village Center, T, which is a 2-family zone, and the PO, which are professional office districts. The 21 to 50 dwelling unit category, there are only 5 buildings in the village for a total of 141 dwelling units, and those are primarily located in the PO and the PWC districts. For the 50-plus dwelling units, there are 11 buildings in that category, and the total number is
1,248.
There it is. Thank you. 1,248. And they're primarily located in the MF1 and MF2 zoning districts. However, there is one building in that category with 73 dwelling units that's located along Walden Road. And what's interesting, if you were to take the subcategory of the 6 to 10 dwelling units, which are the pink dots, if you were to break out those dwelling units and looked at each individual, so the number of buildings that have 6 dwelling units, based on the list provided by the assessor, that's 21 buildings of the 47 for a total of 126 dwelling units. And there are 8 buildings that have 7 dwelling units, and they have a total combined of 56 dwelling units. There are 9 buildings that have a total of 8 dwelling units for a combined total of 72 dwelling units. There are 2 buildings with 9 dwelling units for a total of 18 dwelling units. And there are 6 buildings with 10 dwelling units for a total of 60. And that brings the grand total for that category to 332. And what's interesting to note is that this category is larger than the next 2 categories of the 11 to 20 and the 21 to 50, because that, if I recall correctly, totaled 317, I believe. So the two largest categories of dwelling units in this village are approximately the 6 to 10 dwelling unit size and the 50 plus.
50 to 100.
50 plus, yeah. Anything above 50.
Oh, okay.
Lynn, is that total or is that just pre-1174?
This is all this list was from the assessor, was pre-174.
Right.
So that's not total for the entire village. We just looked at a small subset of
Thanks.
I imagine we're gonna want to have a conversation, so I'd like to be able to turn the overhead off if people have gotten a chance to take a look at it and get a sense of where the buildings are. But we'll do our best to make.
I have a larger map if you want.
Yeah, we'll do our best to make some of this information available online so that folks are able to access it after the fact. But and we have the copies here if we need to look at. But I think we get the idea of where certain types of buildings tend to be located. I just before I know we have a lot of questions, but I do about Stuart. Maybe if you're going to speak to us about an item, I'm the order of operations when it comes to determining what's going to be studied and determining what we may enable. It seems like there should be some flexibility because we could undertake a study about our vacancy as broadly or narrowly as we wanted to anyway, and then have as much information or as little information to be using in making a decision, correct?
Yep.
Okay. All right. What's next?
Well, the discussion about how narrow or how wide do you want, the study group, because I'm assuming that you want to move forward, and in order for us to engage the RFP process to have the study conducted, we would need to know exactly what the board is thinking as far as the unit size. So if we could have a discussion on that, it'd be great.
Can someone please remind me what the specs were last time that the board selected to be studied last year?
Do you have that, Lynn?
Let me think. I have a letter.
It was 2 years ago, but all we looked
2 years
at was,
ago, sorry.
It was 2016. We only looked at the ETPA eligible buildings, and we looked at a snapshot within a couple of days of each other. It's different approaches, is my understanding.
Yes.
Stuart, if you can speak to that, because I know you've done some research on this as well.
That's correct, Mayor. There are a variety of ways that the study can be done. The study could include all units, under 6 and below for all years to get a total vacancy number, and then look at the different classifications that the board may want to consider: 6 and over, 6 to 20, over 50. So there are different ways that is to be looked at, because the important thing to note is that the 1174 date is the date prior to which it's those buildings which would be affected by ETPA, unless the buildings had substantial rehabilitation subsequent thereto, which is something that has to be demonstrated to the Department of Housing and Community Renewal.
I'm sorry, so I understand. So what does that mean, substantial?
Substantial rehabilitation, in a nutshell,
Yeah.
is that you have done work in your building. It's basically a 75% repair to your building, and it's not just to an individual apartment. It's to overall systems in the building, be it heating, plumbing. It's a significant rehab job to the building, which is determined by DHCR. If they find that in fact it is not sufficient, your building would not be removed from the list of stabilized apartments, but you could get each individual apartment getting an increase for what's considered a major capital improvement on an annual basis. So again, and that's there's actually I have it here. There's an operational bulletin from DHCR which goes through it, but it's essentially at least 75% of the building-wide and apartment systems contained must have been replaced with new systems. And that would, and they list it, that's basically plumbing, heating, gas, electrical, intercom, windows, roofs, elevators. You have to show that you've done that to at least 75% of the building. Otherwise, if you're a pre-1174 building, you would be covered. There are certain exceptions. The statute now lists, I think, up to 13 exceptions, which would be covered. The simplest one is less than six units are not covered. But in terms of doing the study, the important thing to note is you don't have to count every single unit. The courts have made that very clear. But neither the regulations nor the statute, in fact, give a method of how you're supposed to do it. But the best thing to say is that what the courts have said, the courts in New York, particularly the courts, the appellate court in Brooklyn, which governs where we are, is that while you don't need to do a complete survey, you have to have your data in organized and coherent form, and your data must be precise. But precise is also a relative term. And the reason I say that is the village of Spring Valley, years ago, this is in the 1980s, commissioned a vacancy study, and the way they did it was they had their corporation counsel send out letters to every apartment dweller, every apartment owner, and basically said, how many vacancies do you have? And they wrote in the letter that if you do not respond, we will deem it that you have no vacancies. And the court found that was okay. They came back with a vacancy rate of 3.5%, and they enacted ETPA. But you have to essentially have good numbers. How you do that, if you want to look at every single type of available apartment in your town or village, you can do that. If you want to break it down, because the way the statute is written is, it's either 5% of the classes that the board has determined should be segregated out, or it's all of the housing accommodations in the municipality. And there's a question as to exactly what does that mean in terms of a survey, but the courts certainly do not say that you can't look at all of the units if you want to do it. But again, issues of like substantial rehabilitation, that's something that a property owner would go to DHCR, fill out paperwork, and demonstrate that this is the work that they have done, and that's why they are they're not eligible. Same with a nonprofit. Nonprofits are generally not covered by ETPA, even for pre-1174 buildings. So there are exceptions to that. One thing to note, the current Emergency Tenant Protection Act is scheduled to sunset on June 15th of 2019. It has been amended in the past, so it has gone to new dates, but just a point for the board to know that currently ETPA sunsets on June 15th of 2019. I don't have the answer to the question is what happens if you adopt ETPA and it then sunsets? Are those particular municipalities still covered? And just so folks in the audience know, many of you probably do, ETPA covers just Westchester, Rockland, and Nassau counties. It is basically an analog to the rent stabilization law, which covers the city of New York, and both have fairly similar regulations. But it's only passed for those three counties, so that's why you're only going to see court decisions effectively from an appellate court in Brooklyn, because you're not going to see it from Manhattan. But cases that involve the rent stabilization law in Manhattan are pertinent to this because they also have to do surveys, although in the city the surveys have to be done every 3 years. That is not a requirement under ETPA. One thing also to note, and I think Lynn alluded to it, while ETPA is optional, regardless of what the whether if you're below 5%, the municipality may or may not enact ETPA. Once the vacancy study shows that your vacancy is in excess of 5%, ETPA stops in that municipality. There is no discretion by the municipality. They cannot basically vote to continue it. If they get a study and it's over 5% and they do not come back with a study that shows in fact it's below 5%, the courts have declared that ETPA must at that point terminate. So it's just a point to keep in mind. That's seen a lot. It's seen particularly on Long Island, where you have a lot of these buildings, and what happens is the property owners go out, they get their own studies, and they basically challenge the 5% finding. One other thing, just with regard to something the mayor mentioned, in terms of the period of time you want to look at for vacancies, I believe the prior study was just over 1 or 2 days. It was a fairly small window in terms of what they were looking for. Many of the studies that I've looked at go over a couple of weeks, a couple of months, to basically determine what is the vacancy rate. So instead of just doing a very quick snapshot, you're giving it a little bit longer because you may have people who are not home. You may have landlords who don't respond. That's again something that can be discussed both with the entity that's going to do the study, but also really from direction from the board, because ultimately the board sets a lot of those parameters as to terms how that study's to be done, what's to be counted.
And Stuart, as far as the courts go, where is it litigated? So if there are landlords who argue with the findings, where is it litigated? New York State, you said, runs it, but
A
where is
couple
it
of different
litigated?
things. If the landlord were to challenge the declaration from this board that there is an emergency, and therefore to adopt ETPA, they would then be commencing an Article 78 proceeding in Supreme Court in Westchester County, which is where the municipality is located. It's not heard in the local justice court. The only thing that would be heard in the justice court here would be an eviction proceeding, as is the standard in any circumstance. But if the landlord were to challenge the determination regarding substantial improvement or major capital investment or work along those lines, that actually is initially heard by a DHCR hearing examiner, and then they have their own appellate process, and then you could ultimately go to court. But if the village's determination were challenged, it would be through an Article 78 in the Supreme Court.
Wilson.
I've got a couple questions. When we went over the summary with Lynn, she talked about the need to determine the size and the class of buildings that we want to regulate. That doesn't determine the study itself, correct? In other words, we don't sort of straw man a piece of legislation based on a certain grouping of houses, and that's how the study's based? Or, I mean, is there a linkage between the two things?
There can be, because this board could say or make a determination, we're only looking at 50 to 90 units. Let's just throw that out as a number. So then you could look just to see what that is. Now, that doesn't mean that when you're doing your housing survey, you're not looking potentially at all vacancies, because sometimes what happens is you could have in the 50 to 90, you could have under 5%. But throughout the rest of the village, you could have numbers which are over 5%. So it's sort of like, do you want to choose this one thing? But the short answer is you can limit your study if you wanted to. The courts, in many of the cases, seem to look that they'd like a broader study because they want to see overall what the vacancy is. And then you can say, okay, that within this, we see that within the 50 to 90 range, we are at 3.75%. So for this, in that particular zone, we would declare an emergency as to that area. And again, that would also be looking, again, across all different areas as to what you think is the pertinent. Or you could, of course, make the determination that you just want to do it across all housing accommodations, essentially 6 and greater, and which is what many municipalities in Westchester have chosen to do.
Irrespective of whether they're ETPA eligible or not.
Well, in terms of ETPA, what a number of jurisdictions in Westchester have said is our floor is 6 units. So anything above 6 units. What their studies were, most likely, if you're doing it that way, it would have been a broad study of all vacancy rates. But most in Westchester, some are a little bit different. Croton, I think, is 50. But a number in Westchester essentially start at 6 and just take everything in from there.
Now, didn't Mount Kisco do 6 or more at buildings that were built before 1974? Like, wasn't that their focus, Mount Kisco?
I think there was. Didn't bring the list down with me here, but I may have it in my book, so if I could cheat, that would be fair. But
Not cheating if you did the homework, Stuart.
well, yeah, I have the beholder, Mayor. I have the beholder. But the let's just see. It doesn't have the list here, but I know Mount Kisco is one. There are a number. Yonkers, I know, is 6, but there are a number that have actually gone higher than that. As I said, Croton, I think, is 50, and the village, of course, can change, those numbers as the numbers change if they want to.
Oh, you're asking. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So what I
You're
was
asking
asking,
the number of the minimum number of units that are part of the ETPA.
so I believe that what Mount Kisco did is they said that we're going to look at a vacancy rate of 6 or more units that were built before 1974. That was their focus. It wasn't as broad as 6 or more units in the whole entire village, but really looking at the eligible buildings.
Well, and what you're right about is that would clearly be, those are clearly the units that could be covered by
Yes.
ETPA. But that need not be your study. Your study can obviously be broader to encompass everything. I'll give you an example. In White Plains, they included in their study public housing, which is generally exempt. And that created a court battle because the vacancy rate in the public housing in White Plains is effectively 0.
Absolutely.
So by essentially adding those units in, the only way you would get above 5% is that if some other place suddenly had massive numbers of vacancies. And there was an argument that White Plains incorrectly included those numbers to get it below 5%. The court said no, they were absolutely permitted to do that. So you could put that in, and figure out in terms of how you want to do that. Because as they said, in a public housing scenario, you're going to have very few vacancies. But that was counted, and now there was an agreement to count the number, but that was part of how they did it there.
Well, also, I mean, if I'm looking at the housing needs assessment that was done, and I assume that this is all accurate. There's an estimation of the number of units based on the fees that are collected in each of the municipalities. So if we look at Mount Kisco, if their study was done on 6 units or more, they actually determined that they would have ETPA in effect for a minimum of 16 units. So they may have studied 6 units or more, but then decided for whatever reason, whatever the numbers, the vacancy was in those smaller buildings, they decided not to include it in ETPA, whatever their factors were. But that was also done, if they were only looking at buildings inhabited by 1974, the year was adopted was 1979. So there wasn't all that much that wasn't included in the study at that point. And the White Plains was actually done in 1974. So
most of the ones in Westchester were adopted shortly after ETPA was adopted. There have been a few more recent ones. One thing that Lynn was alluding to is that if the village declares an emergency, one of the things that DHCR will do very quickly is tell the village how much it owes the DHCR to operate the program. And with that, and I believe it's a $10 per unit charge can be assessed again. You go ahead.
Yes, you are correct.
Okay.
The legislation provides for a $10 unit charge that can be passed along to the landlord by the village, but the village is assessed by DHCR and they're responsible for paying the money up front on New York State's annual fiscal year. It's based on their fiscal year, not ours, and it doesn't follow the same fiscal cycle.
But it's only for units that qualify for ETPA.
Yes,
Right,
yes.
but they have a method of
Exactly.
figuring out what that number is, and
They're very quick on collecting their money.
oh yes,
Right, and yes, all the administrative fees, the management fees, everything.
So what you need from us is what the focus of the vacancy study is going to be.
Right, so the database sheet that I gave you that looks like this has all of the eligible units. Is a breakdown of what Lynn provided you in summary format so that you can look at the locations and the number of units that are in each of those buildings. 6 is the law, so that's why we picked 6, but this is everything that would qualify potentially without all those other things that might disqualify it for whatever reason. Have to decide. I personally think that if you want to look at all of them, that you should include all of them, and then you can, when we do the RFP, we can say that we want it by groups so that you can look at the results by group, or that data in different ways so that you can decide ultimately where you fall.
So, for the task of our task, my understanding of the task is to find a determination as to whether or not we have a housing emergency, right? So that's a task at hand. So I guess our question tonight really is, do we focus on the units that would only be affected by such determination, or do we expand that? Because right now it kind of seems like
I'm fine with this list.
it would only be.
I like that question, and I think it's a valuable question, especially because this framework and this expectation for the vacancy study was established back in the 70s when this was established, and that was the housing stock. I think it's important for us to know what is our housing stock for the community if we're going to bother undertaking this. And depending on how we look at these numbers, because these numbers are a little different than what we got from the housing needs assessment. There's actually more buildings that are being identified as eligible for ETPA than had been identified in the housing needs assessment. But if we go very broad, then that information could potentially be valuable. For example, with work that the Landlord-Tenant Relations Council is doing, one of their tasks is to take a look at what is our housing stock, what is the quality, the vacancy, the availability of our housing stock. So if we're going to undertake it, I would like us to consider doing it for all rental units, maybe just 6 or more, because it's just that much more complicated to get into the 2 and 3 family homes kind of things. That might be just a level of onerousness that we don't want to go to for whoever we hire to do this. But I'd be interested in considering doing a really comprehensive housing study to know what is really the vacancy for folks broadly in our community. But I would also then want to know what are the rents that are associated with those vacancies, because this is largely intended to make sure that we are preserving affordability for units that are available in our community. If the only units that are available are luxury units, then that's a really significant story. And the piece of it that we need to have in order to enable ETPA is what is the vacancy in the class that we're looking to implement. So the vacancy could be whatever it is in a building that's not eligible, and that doesn't have an impact on our ability to enable ETPA. Correct? Am I correct in everything that I'm saying?
You are.
Thank you.
All right, well then I'm going to have to, so I have to understand this a little better now. So you're saying we should take the broad brush look, that we should do this analysis for all rental properties, and but then to make our determination, we would basically look at the eligible units to make the determination whether we were going to enact it or not.
Right, that's what the law tells us to do. We can only look at the vacancy rate for the classes that are eligible. It would just be a matter of let's have as much information as possible and be as well informed as possible when we make a decision.
Yeah, I guess if we're going to do a study, we should do it once for the whole thing. Yeah. So we know how many total units is that?
For the of all
rental,
from
all
like
rental
two
units
family and above. No, we didn't request that. No, if we were going to do the entire section.
She's speaking about 6 or more units that are not that. So she wants to include 6 or more units that were built past 1974 in the vacancy study. Essentially,
this would be the first step. So can we
that,
find
right?
out what that is?
I can request that information. I don't have it.
Okay, because we're just bringing it up now.
Yeah, I just I understand that, but my point earlier was the task at hand was it's an ETPA discussion for the ETPA program for ETPA potentially qualified units. So to move that discussion and or determination, I would kind of want to focus on those. And if what you're saying, I get the whole overall question. It seems like a separate project, but I guess that's what we're discussing now. But then we've got to, speak about timeline and what that means. And because what you're saying, I feel like should be a whole separate conversation, having a village-wide study. That's not what was my understanding of, because the task was to make a determination for the units that qualify for said program, which is called ETPA. So if we're going to be studying stuff that has nothing to do with EPA, I'm not saying we can't, but it's just separate. That's all. It's different.
Did you want to comment?
Yeah, no, I'm actually in agreement with Trustee Herrera because I think we already have a list of eligible buildings, and I kind of want to keep it pretty simple. While I understand the broad brush, and it might be, we may want to know. I mean, if for anything that was built for 6 or more units that were built before or after 1974, I mean, I would say let our staff do it. If that's some interest, just to try to figure things out. But I'm definitely fine with this list that has been presented.
I'd like to put this in a little more context because 2 years ago we had a lot of public discussion about ETPA. We undertook a vacancy study that was probably too narrow and didn't really bring us to a point of making a further decision. And so we're approaching it a little differently now. And one of the results that came out of those 2016 conversations was that we should do a housing needs assessment. And we did. We undertook a really in-depth housing needs assessment last year. And that included a significant amount of research, both from a data perspective, from a community outreach perspective. And the result of that was a very thoughtful report, which is available online if anybody hasn't gotten a chance to read it. Studies and research and resources or something online, and then there's housing studies, and there's actually 4 parts to it. Part 1 delves into the data. Part 4 is a list of the 8 policies. And it's very clear in this report that we generated last year, doing a lot of community outreach, getting a lot of information. They are very specific that these 8 policy recommendations are presented in a particular order, and they should be approached in that order. ETPA is number 8. And if you look at the implementation steps, number 1 says continually monitor the rate of rental increases and displacement of residents in ETPA eligible buildings through landlord and tenant surveys, which we have not done, but this could potentially be, I don't know if this particularly qualifies that as the housing, let me continue. Implement other elements of the housing policy framework and evaluate their effectiveness in meeting housing needs, which we are getting underway. We have already begun, and in fact, we're going to discuss some of the others. The first one is related to our economic development strategy. The second one is we can talk more about it, but we have been working through these policy recommendations. Whether or not we enable ETPA within the next 3 months or 6 months or 3 years, which is what is recommended here, it very specifically states in this recommendation that while there are a number of benefits that ETPA could bring to our community, it is not recommended that we move forward with enabling ETPA unless and until we have tried the other recommended policies and they have failed to bring us to our goals. So with that in mind, I do not think it is reasonable for us to say ETPA is its own thing. It is one arrow in the quiver of trying to address our bigger questions of housing. And for that reason, if we are going to dedicate village resources and time to doing a study, I'd like it to be as valuable as possible, to telling us the whole picture of what's going on with the housing.
So with all due respect, Mayor Garrity, the first time that I heard a housing needs assessment was approximately November of 2015, probably October of 2015. So there was always a thought of a housing needs assessment prior to us initiating the study. And again, the reason we didn't move forward with ETPA previously was just there wasn't enough political will. The study that we undertook previously was confirmed by our own department heads, and we had the vacancy rate. Now, something I think you read there before was being able to look at the rents of ETPA eligible buildings. We need to do a study to even begin that conversation. So let's not confuse enacting ETPA, right? Because it could very well happen like last time, right? Like You know, we get the information, right, and the information is there, and we still don't do it. But those are two different things. So,
Right, and number 4 of these implementation steps is update the vacancy study with the most recently available census information or through administration of a new survey.
Yeah.
We haven't done 1, 2, and 3, even on policy number 8.
so we have but we have though. Like we've had conversations in a public meeting, which we had talked about. We're kind of near number 5 already, right? Like we're working on code enforcement. You know, we're working with an economic development person. That's a part of our 2018 initiatives, which we'll talk about later. We have dealt with the affordable housing law, and that's kind of in the
And how are all those working for us so far?
and that's kind of in the oven, right? So we're kind of at number 5. And you know, with all due respect to our housing needs assessment, I mean, he was able to gather information about based on the amount of community input that was there, right? So again, with all due respect, the reason we didn't do ETPA the last time is because there just wasn't enough political will. The information was there, and we just didn't move on it. And you know, you may say that this one critiqued us, but it was there. It was verified twice. So again, I understand the whole thing of doing 6 or more and seeing if the luxury apartments are vacant or not vacant, but this is about ETPA. This is about the 6 or more units built before 1974, because I think there's a telling story there.
So it wasn't actually political will, it was that there were so many problems with the information that was supplied. There were so many holes in that study. I did.
Who's on now?
I have like no voice, sorry. So I don't think that's actually an accurate statement. It is tricky though. I mean, the point is that only certain buildings qualify. It would be nice to get a study that talks about the whole community, because it is not a clear picture of the situation when you segment out only certain buildings. I mean, it's hard to believe that, well, that was in the 1970s or 80s, that the court allowed, you know, certain buildings that are by their nature 100% full at all times to be included in a study, because it totally skews all the numbers. It's the same thing as including, yeah, I mean, but they probably figured, listen, you're supposed to include everything, right? It works both ways. You include everything on one end of the spectrum and you include everything on the other end of the spectrum. So I think this is actually a tricky thing, and I think deciding on the classes. So, you know, there's a lot of talk about only one community that's done it recently in Crowell, but that's like one building, right? It's like one building. They figured out a way to classify one building, and that's like a big beacon of hope. It's ridiculous. It's one building out of the entire system. The rest were mostly done in the 70s, some in the 80s, I guess, because of when this stuff was passed. It would be great for the landlord-tenant council to be able to look at the whole picture. Are these studies being done by staff, or are you sending an RFP to have it done by an outside source?
We were planning to have it done by an outside source, so that the data could be deemed reliable and credible.
And also, you don't have staff to do this. I mean, who are you going to get to do this? I mean,
but
you know.
I think it's important that the data that's collected is done by
Right.
an independent person.
Yeah, by a third party who has some professional capability of doing this correctly, because that's been a problem in the past. And so I'm like on the fence of whether we should do it before 1974 or the whole place. It would be nice to get a study that actually talks for real, empirically. Because otherwise we just sit here getting angry with one another and everybody gives us their opinions rather than work with facts. It's a tough one.
Stuart, can you confirm that if we had a vacancy rate that was different for buildings that were pre-1974 versus post-1974, that what's the number that needs to be below 5% is solely representative of the buildings that are ETPA eligible in the class that's being considered? So if we had a vacancy rate of 6 in a new building, but of 3 in a 1972 building, for a class of buildings, let's say, then it provides us with a picture of what's the housing landscape in Ossining at this time, but whatever the vacancy rate is in a building that was built from 1975, 1974, any time later, does not have any impact on our ability to enable ETPA. Can you confirm that, or is that something we need to look into? Because that would obviously be a big to make a big difference in this consideration.
I hear where the board is going with this, and I don't want to.
I'm not sure.
We're not there yet.
That's my follow-up
But I
question.
do want to ask. I do
Not
want to
there yet.
understand that, though.
I'll try.
Go on the record
I'll
as saying
do-
I didn't
I'll-
even understand the
no.
question. So.
I'll use the acronym that my law school professor once used, which was SAK. Someone always knows. And this time I have to find out who that someone actually is, and I will get you the answer. However, the way the statute is worded is that it has to be a minimum of 5% in the class or classes or overall housing accommodations. So if you are choosing a particular class and you are below 5%, then you can enact ETPA. Your question, I think, Mayor, is if that number includes, post 1174, how does that figure in? And I will get you that answer.
Because a class is typically the size. So if we're just talking about buildings 20 units or more, for example.
That's generally how they are defining classes here. That's right. They're going by a range of number of units in a particular number of units. That's correct.
But we would want to know, before making a decision on how broadly to do the study, we would want to know if that class can be limited or is limited to just ETPA eligible buildings for making the determination.
Let me just say this. For ETPA, the only buildings that would be stabilized would be but in terms of the study is the question I think you're getting
Yes.
at, and that I will get further clarification for all that.
But Stuart, if we chose to just study the ETPA buildings, we could do that.
If you decided to simply study pre-1174 buildings, there's nothing that stops you from doing that. If the board's decision was to do that, you could. The only caveat I want to make for you is this: the numbers are going to be looked at no matter which way they go, and what is it that Mark Twain said? Liars always figure and things like that. Well, I'm not saying anyone's a liar here, but when you play with figures, things can always happen. So you really want to be dead certain on your numbers here. But in response to your question, if the board decided that what they wanted to do was solely go from 1174 and before, I think the earlier cutoff is like 1947. The answer is they could do that if they chose to do that.
Because I believe that's what Mount Kisco did. Like there was a court case that's exactly what they did.
Actually, let me look, because I have the Mount Kisco. Keep going. I apologize. But
So if that's the case, I want to know is if there's enough consensus on the board to just focus on ETPA buildings.
Buildings before
Before
January 1st of 1970.
That's what I'm looking for.
And let me just throw one other sort of wrench in here. You're also going to be looking at condominiums that are apartments, that are used as apartments.
Sublet, yeah.
Because those count, and those are stabilized.
And the numbers that we have from what Fernando ran brought us to 1,897 units, correct? Am I looking at this correctly?
Yes, you're correct.
We have a really interesting housing stock picture compared to other municipalities in Westchester, because obviously you've got Yonkers with like 21,000 ETPA units and
Great community.
very, very big community. Yes,
Great
and you've
community.
got well, I'm just saying it's
It's
not
a
really. I'm
city.
saying it's
It's
not
a city.
analogous
Yeah.
to the village.
No, I just want to put on
Boston.
record that that's a great community. That's
Yeah,
all.
this is no judgment on how lovely all these communities are. This is just a review of where we are with our housing stock and how the numbers shake out. Because you've got the big cities, you've got Yonkers and White Plains and Mount Vernon and New Rochelle, and they all have in the thousands. The smallest of which being White Plains, which is 2,750. And then the largest of those cities, which is Yonkers, having 21,000. But then when you look at the villages and towns, like Mount Kisco, which you were talking about as an example, and they use a minimum units of 16 units. It was adopted in 1979, so they've had it in place for quite some time. But they only have 74 units that are part of their program, whereas we would have potentially 1,897, although if we cut it at 16 as our minimum, if we were to mimic Mount Kisco, then it would obviously be a little bit less. But then the next closest would be, kind of surprisingly, Dobbs Ferry has 550. Hastings has 350. But Portchester, which we get compared to a lot, and they're actually a bigger community than us, they have about 400 units. So it's we just as we look at other communities to try and understand how their experience is, most of them have had it in place for decades because they implemented it close to the time when it was made available to them. And either they're large cities, which are very different from us, or they're towns and villages, and they have at most a third as many units that are in the program as us. So, you know, it was a program that was created in response to a particular circumstance in the 1970s. And what was the housing emergency then? It was a really innovative, progressive program at the time that it was created. And it has been in place in a number of communities for a number of years. And beyond ETPA and whatever happens with this discussion, Ossining is looking at a lot of innovative, progressive approaches for how we can address our housing needs today. So however we move forward with ETPA, I'm very pleased that we're moving forward with so many programs that are recommended by the Housing Needs Assessment and that we have already begun discussions of. And the many elements of our community and our economic development that have a really direct impact on the ability for people to afford to live in our community. And we're going to get to some of those tonight. I feel like we do not have at least one answer that we need for.
May I ready? I
I
actually still have to say some.
Okay,
If I may.
please.
Okay. So I read the housing needs assessment, which I thought was done very well, and I commend the previous board, which is the majority of you here, for actually doing that. So thank you. I don't necessarily think that the order is in gospel. I mean, just last year we were doing something in our downtown that was putting the horse before the wagon and not following the comprehensive plan. So I think it's a little disingenuous to say that we have to follow every plan in order by project, because that just hasn't been it. As far as Trustee Levin's point about that we're only targeting a certain population, yes, we are only targeting a certain population. We're targeting people who would fall into ETPA eligible units. We're also falling into, targeting people that you would consider most at risk when it comes to housing and overall security. So yes, I have no problem saying that yes, this piece of legislation is targeting a certain group in our community. A lot of initiatives that we have throughout the village target particular groups. That's how government works. You see a lot of insecurities, you see a lot of risk, you see a lot of need when it comes to economic development or housing or business or laws. You tailor initiatives and programs to reach those people. This whole thing that you know, if it doesn't affect the whole community, we're not touching it or talking about it. It's just not acceptable to me. We need to really see why we're even having this discussion of ETPA, right? I mean, we're not there yet. We don't know if it's going to happen or not, right? But it has to be addressed, the whole picture. And lastly, my understanding, I was still in the States, so I couldn't really be part of the discussions, but I did go to some hearings, and it never came to a vote. So we had the entire process, we had public hearings, and then the public was kind of just laid out to rest. And then we kind of forced other stuff to happen, right? Because it wasn't a sexy topic to have on our agendas. But so to me, this is continuing business, rectifying how we operated with the public and vice versa, and moving the conversation forward. I'm not saying which way we're going to go because I can't speak for my board members, and it's great to know also that if we did have the potential of this particular program that has worked in 19 communities, that they sunset possibly in June 2019. So I do want to know what our options are and what it means if we don't do it in the next year or two or lack thereof. And I did say it, I am targeting a particular population with the discussion of this law.
So back to the question I have, Stuart, did you see about Mount Kisco and
Yes.
and what they studied?
Actually, it's interesting. The Mount Kisco ordinance from 1979 was thrown out
Mm.
because they didn't do a study.
Okay.
They simply declared, the board simply declared that there was an emergency.
Mm.
And the appellate court said, you can't do that. You actually have to do a study. So it's interesting because I know they say they adopted in 1979, but the appellate court in 1984 declared the 1979 resolution void. So unless they re-adopted it sometime after that and did a study, because what they did was, at the close of the public hearing, the Board of Trustees stated by resolution it declares there is a housing emergency based upon a finding of a vacancy rate less than 5%. What they relied upon was a HUD survey that was done a couple of years before on a completely separate topic. And the court said that that's not a good faith study. So they basically voided the entire thing. So what that would mean is that Mount Kisco subsequently would have had to have done another study. That's not referenced in here, but as of 1998, 1984, they threw it out.
Has there been any study that just focused solely on the ETPA buildings?
Mount
Mount Vernon, I believe. Because there was a case on that, wasn't there?
I have to see if I know.
Because I think it came up 2 years ago because in New York City they do all the buildings.
After every 3 years.
But I believe I think it was a Mount Vernon case that allows you to just do ETPA buildings. At
Could
least
be.
in Westchester, ETPA
I mean-
eligible buildings.
Now, let me give you in the reverse. When you're trying to get rid of ETPA, you will only look at the particular building and that particular section. Because by that point, you've already voted ETPA in. So there you're looking to show that it's above or below 5%. If it's above, as I said, it's mandated, it has to be terminated.
If we chose to study this list right here, we would be fine. That's my question. This list that's been provided.
I can answer you this way. What the court has said is it is not mandated that you look at every single unit. It doesn't say that you have to, but I can merely tell you that it's not mandated that you look at every unit. I'm not trying to play the lawyer here, but I'm just telling you that's what the courts have said. The reason is this: there's literally overall, in terms of the decisions on this, probably is a total of 10 decisions that deal with this. There's no, it
the last 4
doesn't come up
years.
that much. And this is, since 1974.
Yeah.
Is there at least 3 board members who would be fine pushing study with this list that's been provided?
With just having that much information, you
Yes.
don't feel, so you're asking, does the board feel that we only want to look at ETPA buildings? We do not feel that it would be
That is my
valuable while we're
question.
doing that to go
All the-
be
all the-
ETPA eligible?
Just to
All-
paraphrase,
all-
we
all
would
the
only
values-
look at ETPA units for ETPA program for ETPA legislation.
Yes.
Okay.
That's is there at least 3? I'm gonna count myself as one.
Yes.
I'm fine with that.
You have what you need.
So for me, the next step is making sure that we do an RFP for the study
Yes.
and that we're comfortable with the methodology and the way they're going to do the study and how that's all going to work.
Yes.
And then you'll have to determine what classes you ultimately want to work with. If you want to go just 6 and above, or you want to break it up. That's clearly, that's a decision you're going to
classes
have to
are
make.
always
Well,
done
that'll
by
be part of the
size.
RFP.
Classes are always done by size, correct? Or not?
Yeah. They
You can't do it by area, you have to,
Actually, you could.
really?
You could, if you felt that was necessary.
Oh,
By neighborhood, you mean?
Well, if you look at
really?
Rural
Lynn's-
zone, yes.
Mhm.
if you look at
Right.
Lynn's outline, the size, as the legislation notes, 6 units or more. The number can be modified, but I'm hearing that you want to do the study on all of them. The class is, do you want to only do residential buildings? Do you want to do mixed-use buildings that have 6 units or more?
No.
Only in specific zones, non-owner occupied? So that's really the class. So
Hence the value of having this laid out for us with
I just
color
didn't realize
coordination
you
on
could
our
do it
zoning
by
map. Yeah.
area.
Well,
or by zone. zoning
you
district.
can. You
Yeah.
could do by zoning district, by area.
When you set up the classes, you mean?
Yes.
Because
I
we're going
mean,
to
you
actually
can-
change our zoning districts likely.
Yeah, I
At least
mean-
that
Right,
what's
right.
in there by
Yeah.
updating our comp plan. So that seems like
So
might
the list that I
complicate things.
gave you also tells you what zoning district each of those properties is in.
Right. Well, that's interesting.
And for instance, sorry, go ahead. For instance, on this list, there are only 6 buildings on the list that Fernando provided that are mixed use, that have a retail or commercial component on the bottom and residential units above. 5 of those units exist in the 6 or under 6 to 10 category. So that's smaller
weird.
downtown
Yeah,
retail. That's going to be.
it's weird.
I do want to clarify something because Trustee Herrera said several times that you're targeting a certain demographic. You're targeting certain groups of people. And I want to clarify one thing about the program because ETPA, if it's implemented in a building, there is no needs assessment for income needs assessment for the residents who live there. It's the units. Unless a unit has a rent of over $2,700 and for at least 2 years somebody's made over $200,000 a year, which is extremely unlikely in Ossining. That's really not our reality here. It has happened that some units in Irvington and some of the other communities where they have become exempt from ETPA because they've had that circumstance. This is one piece of a much larger question and approach to how do we provide housing for our community. And people who benefit from ETPA, who live in ETPA eligible buildings, if we implement ETPA, are integral to the success of the whole community. We are a community that has always valued having a diversity, not just culturally, but of socioeconomics. We are a community that values people being able to live in Ossining and work in Ossining. We want to have jobs for people who live here, and we want the people who live here to be able to, the people who work here to be able to afford to live here if they choose to. So when we implement ETPA, if that's what we do, we are doing it for the whole community. Whoever is living in those units, whoever's living in those units today, or a year from now, or 2 years from now, they're part of our community, and every decision that we make about housing and economic development is about all of us.
Can I just make one request of the board?
Please.
I think in my 13 months here, I have not done this, but I'm going to request that you allow me to just confirm the answer to the question you asked.
Okay.
Because I don't want to go down the path of doing a study and then we find out that what we needed to do was in fact do a broader study.
Yeah.
Give me like just a few days to just answer that. I've sort of turned my office into the bat cave over the past few, going through all these ETPAs and operational rules and fact sheets. But let me just answer that, and I will let the board, and I'll report back to the board, because at that point, then we'll know precisely what we have to do next.
And if the answer is yes to my question, then
Understood.
okay.
Understood. I just want to do it that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, I used the word target because it was used earlier. So I just wanted to, that's why I used it. And while I understand that everything we do affects the whole community, not all the needs and experiences are the same with everyone in the community. So that's what we're all trying to strive to come to accord, to get to that equity standpoint on how we legislate and how we bring everyone to the same level and at the same line. So I stand by what I said, but thank you.
All right, thanks. If folks want to stay for the whole meeting, they are welcome to. If you'd like to stand up, we can pause for a moment and get ourselves organized for the rest of the meeting. So you're welcome to stay. Most of you now have seats. We pause and people want to take a break. Okay, but be careful, because when we pause and 20 people are leaving the room, then you get in 20 conversations. I mean, we have a long agenda.
So next on the agenda is a discussion of the 2018 department initiatives. I have distributed that to you several weeks ago. Hope you've had a time to go over it. I gave you a copy tonight so that you could refer to it. And I think that one of the important parts of this discussion is to really look at all the different things that are happening in all the different departments. And I am going to be working with the staff to say, this is when we anticipate starting this initiative. And then also giving the board a better sense of the staff resources that are going to have to go into some of these projects. And particularly community development, building, code enforcement, because we have the comprehensive plan, we have the economic development, we've got the parking study, now we have an ETPA, which is not even on this list yet, so it's going to have to be added. and having a discussion of your priorities. Because as we add new things, as in this case, an ETBA study, you know, it may not take that long, it may take longer than we anticipate, but, you know, some of these things are gonna have to get bumped. And I know that everybody wants everything done right away, but I think it's just really important to manage our expectations of when we expect these processes to start, or how we're moving them forward. And it's my expectation that every month that I'll be able to report to you based on this list of items to say, you know, we said we were going to start this in January. This is, you know, we've started it. Here's where we're at. If we've come up through any stumbling blocks, we can let you know. And then, you know, being able to coordinate with all of you on the activities that have to, or not have to, that's really the bad way, that we want to engage our community in those discussions. So it's a lot of work here. Again, we are, you know, reformatting our staff, and we are putting new resources in place in order to get some of these things advanced and done. But I just really wanted to give you an understanding of all of the things that we're doing and the complexity, especially as you asked me or Stuart to do new things. And, oh, by the way, you know, this would be a really great project. Well, where does it really fit in our priority list? Because we are going to max out our staff, and I want to make sure that we're taking care of your priorities. You know, as we go through the year and more things come up, you know, if we can fit them in, we do. If they become very large projects, it's really going to have to be a discussion of, well, what else, what can we defer for a couple of more months or till next year or whatever, based on whatever happens. And, you know, I have no way of predicting what happens. So, I think the really big things are in the community development, and that's, you know, those big studies that we're going to be doing and when we're going to be launching them. Again, we are in the process of looking for additional staff, and I am interviewing a couple of candidates for the larger position of community development director, or what we call director of code enforcement. So once we get that person in place, I think that's going to really help our abilities to process more and to do more things and get them launched. We've had discussions about some of the activities that staff would normally take on when we do a large project like a parking study or a comprehensive plan, and building into the RFP the consultant doing more of the work to advance some of those projects. So, you know, I just also wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. As we, you know, I put Stuart stuff on the back, the last page, because everything that we do in every department also affects legal. And again, as we ask him to do more and more research on this or do this project, we have to figure out where that's going to be in a priority list. And again, I want to keep you up to speed on all of that. This way, I believe that we'll be able to accomplish more, and we'll be able to be accountable to our citizens and the community that we serve by letting them know what we're working on, the transparency that Trustee Herrera talks about. You know, just, you know, we are working hard for the people that we represent and that we work for. So I think this is a great way of sharing our information with them and then letting them know where we are in those things. Some of the economic development, you know, we've talked about hiring a consultant. Well, I've got to have some of those other building blocks in place before we can actually start that. And that's something to take into consideration. I need to get the staffing in place. So we're getting very close to having the staff in place and trained so that, you know, and I was going to take on the economic development part, and that's why I put it as a separate category. There's some things in finance. I think our big concern here is that our HR director will be retiring in April, and that is another position that we will be filling, and that's a key position in this organization. We are in the process of asking civil service for a list at this point, and there's some good candidates on it, so I'm feeling very good about being able to attract a high-quality person to that position. in the information technology, again, I am very supportive of us advancing our technologies because I think in a lot of ways it engages our citizens in a way that they've not engaged with us before. It's important to hear from them, and if we can provide our services online, Jamie has put, she's working on fillable forms, so it's quick, it's easy, you can download it, you can fill it in, you can send it in. I think those are the kind of things that we want to focus on. So we have to build the team to get that in place, because I love Craig, and Craig, if you're watching, you know, I love you, but we need more than one person to do that. And so the board was gracious and gave us enough money to hire a second person, and he and I have been talking about getting that position filled. But there's a lot of things that we want to put in place as far as IT goes. And again, all of this stuff takes time. The streets department, you know, those are the things that are a little routine as far as, you know, we do our annual paving and we do some things like that. But this year we're going to be looking at doing this PCI index analysis, and that's a pavement condition index, where we will go around with the engineers, with Paul and myself and some of the street folks, and we'll look at every street and we'll classify it. And then we'll have a list, and that list will be able to help us drive where we're investing our monies every year. And that way the community will also know, and we can coordinate that with the utilities as best we can, so that we're repairing those roads after they've come through to repair their lines or whatever they need to do. And of course, there's always the anomaly, the I didn't know situation, but I think that it lays out a plan for us that gives us a long-term vision of how we're going to improve our roads over a period of time. With the facilities and grounds, I'm really this year looking to have a full assessment of all of the repairs that we need to do and potential improvements. And again, laying that out in a long-range strategy so that when you're looking at the capital plan, you can say, okay, these are the things in the capital plan, but this is how it fits into our 10-year plan. Again, something that we know intuitively, but we haven't actually put it on paper and shared that with our community. And again, I think that's really important data for everyone to know and to be able to go online and see what we're doing and how we're investing their money, how we're spending it. As you know, we're doing the water treatment facility this year, and we're designing that, so that's going to be a very long process, and that's going to take a lot of Andy's time going through all of that. But we are also going to look at a 10-year replacement schedule. So you can hear this theme. I want to put long-range strategies together for everything that we want to pay attention to, and then be able to smooth out the cost, if you will, and help, and then have discussions with the board on how we want to spend our money, and when bonding resolutions come off, how much more do we want to bond, and where are we going to be focusing it, so that we're fixing the community in the way that you know are telling me that you want that done. We have hired a recreation superintendent, so I'm very excited. He'll be starting on March 12th. And, you know, we're all doing the happy dance over that. So that's a done one. But one of his skill sets is a marketing strategy. And that is something that he brings with him, and how to not only create additional programs, but how to get it out there and how to market them and how to get more customers and more participants in our programs. And we are going to also be looking at a proposal for the board to consider where we have the facility open 7 days a week rather than 6. It's a phenomenal facility, and I see no reason why we shouldn't have activity in that whole facility all the time. Our new superintendent shares that vision as well, so I'm pretty excited about that. So we'll be bringing that to you at a later time. The marketing, of course, we want to be talking about a marketing strategy and hiring a marketing firm to come in. But again, I try to put this on, you know, we have these large initiatives, and where are they going to fall, and what's the bigger priority for us? Which one should we start first and then start later? I think it's really important that we control the messages of the things that we're doing. We have some guidance on how we do that, and then also how we're getting information about what we're doing out to our community. So, you know, we were just deemed in the top 100 safest communities in the country. I thought that was phenomenal, and you know, those are things we need to celebrate. And so if we have a strategy for how we market the things that are happening, I think that we'll start drawing more attention to ourselves, which has a very positive effect of economic development. People will start looking at us and they'll start saying, oh, maybe I want to be there, and maybe I want to live there, and then maybe I want to have my small business there. And then as we put that economic strategy together, we'll know how to fit them into our community and create these, well, what I call fast track permitting processes that we want to put into place. Grants, I think, is something that we have not done as well as we could. I think that it's a skill to write a grant. Any of you who have done it know that it's an art, and there's a lot to it. We are missing the boat on grants here because we don't have someone that's focused on writing them, administering them. I think we've done well. I mean, I don't want to say that we haven't, but we're not getting everything that we could for our community. And I think that's something too that I put it in here because it's important to me, because I think we can do so much more if we can get other people's money. And you know, OPM for me is great. It's all our money. It's all tax dollars, and I get that. But if an agency is giving out money for something and it fits something that we're doing, you know, I certainly want to be there with my hand out saying, can you please pick me? You know, can you please pick our community? And how do we do that? So, you know, I think I put it in there because I think we ought to focus on that a little bit more. For the fire department, I want to work with you, Trustee Codman, and the fire department to really look at our service areas and what we call in the fire service rings of service, and how long it takes for a truck to get to a location. When you do that, you look at and see where there's holes in service, and then you look to relocate firehouses in a more and please, anybody that's in the fire department that's watching this, don't get scared about this. It's just an analysis of what our needs are and how we serve our community, and what opportunities are out there to expand our services if that ever comes up. But I think it's important to know what we're spending, and you know, do we have overlaps, and is there another way? And I don't know what the answer is, but we'll be looking at that with them.
Well, I think if many members of the fire department will expect that part of that story is going to be that there's limited number of trucks that are on the north end of the village.
Sure.
And we know that one of the trucks that's expected to be there doesn't fit right now, so I'm sure that would be part of the picture.
Right.
So it would actually,
It's perfect timing.
Firefighters might be really excited about this stuff.
Yeah, it's perfect timing. It really is. I did this in my last city, and it's a really great exercise, and it really shows you how long it takes to get to each location, and what your response times are. And I think that when we look at it in our community, our roads are so narrow, and there's, you know, it's really hard. There's a lot of hills, and there's a lot of obstacles to overcome. And so we want to provide the best service that we possibly can for everybody. So just doing the analysis, so that's all that is. Just see what happens. And then we have a whole bunch of stuff on the legal end of things. And there's some things that have come up since I put this together. But again, like the Sing Sing Museum, and you know, different policies that we're looking at. I have spoken with Supervisor Levenberg about talking about all of the IMAs, and I look forward to working with you on those, because we realize that all of them need to be looked at again. And so we put it on there to do that review. Yeah, the abandoned zombie properties is on here for legal review, but there is funding, going back to the grant thing, from the state to deal with zombie properties, and I think we should get it. Not that we have a lot of them, but again, if we have a few, we should be reaching out to the state and partnering with them, and then bringing that money into our community. And then that will coincide with all of the new code enforcement initiatives that we've talked about as far as sanitation and building codes and, you know, all the different violations. So with the advent of adding a third code enforcement officer, we're going to be targeting what they do and where they go, so that we can make them the most impact to create a healthy economic grass field, planting field. We want everything to grow here. So that's kind of all the different things. I just would like to hear your reactions to all of the things that you think are the most pressing that we really need to focus on first, so that as I put together my timeline, you know, I can be cognizant of what's most important to all of you.
I'll start first. Just offhand, the comprehensive plan and the economic strategy, I kind of feel go hand in hand.
Okay.
Parking, yeah, but included in parking, what's kind of not here is there's always been, since I can remember, the idea of a jitney and how we move people around the village, particularly when we start looking at our comprehensive plan, we start looking at our zoning and where we're going to possibly build over parking, right? And we might even look at how much parking we require, particularly in TOD districts. I kind of want the parking to be a little more broader, because we have a new county executive, right? And I think when we deal with transportation as far as moving people around the village and really moving people in and out of the village, like if there's a way to coordinate that with our own public transportation, as well as moving people, for example, from Ossining to Pleasantville. Like imagine if there was a jitney that went from Ossining train station to Scarborough to actual Pleasantville. Like just really, I don't know, like even with the urban circulate, like just, I don't want it just to be parking. I want to, like, how do we move people around? And to be in tandem of the grant that we applied for. Because what we may find is that, believe it or not, maybe in 2030, people are not commuting as much. We may find that people are actually in their downtown and their communities more because employment has changed. People don't have to go into the office as much. So I don't ever want to have a case where we just have ample parking. We may find that people are going to be doing more car sharing in the future. So how do we move people around?
Okay.
And that may be able to be kind of wrapped in the comprehensive plan, economic strategy. I feel like comprehensive plan and economic strategy go hand in hand, because as we talk about being a more equitable community and making sure that we develop in a way that meets the needs of all our community, there may be some things that we may want to say, okay, we're willing to work with, we're willing to incentivize. And that would also go into definitely streamlining the permitting processes in the zoning process. And one of the things that in overlay zones and doing the EIS, like making sure that there are certain areas, if we want to invest in certain areas where we want development to happen like that, then we kind of take that approach and do that for them to make sure that we get some of the things that we want to see as a community. So that's
perfect.
Did you understand everything else?
Absolutely. I got it.
Next.
I'm on now. Okay, so I wanted to thank you for, I mean, this is really detailed. I mean, this really gives us an idea exactly what you're looking at and why. So thank you. I'm assuming that this was done from the time you started to now with the help of the board and department heads. That's how you got this information. Yeah. What I would just like to see for my purposes and maybe for my colleagues, if they agree, is there's a lot of points. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. If they could be structured in terms of urgency, which ones, like, you know, hey guys, as your village manager, I have to advise you, if this is not done this year, these are your consequences or risk or whatever, you know.
Sure.
And what I don't see here, which is definitely one of my main priorities, is 200 Main Street.
That's on here.
It is.
Under facilities.
Because I know that you put it on an email and you wanted us to discuss it further, and but we haven't. But
You're
that
right,
just,
it's not. I'll put it under facilities
It was
and
at one
grounds.
point.
especially because I mean that's a perfect example of an urgent situation, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah, that's urgent.
and then, as far as limited time and money,
Mm-hmm.
like if you go down the third bullet point under marketing, hire a marketing firm to create an outreach strategy for economic development and advise the village on messaging for sensitive issues.
Yes.
When I weigh that with a grant writer,
Mm-hmm.
as far as our limited funds and time, I kind of pick the grant writer. That's just me. So like, there's areas where I think that we have to have a discussion as to why something is a priority and why we feel something is less of a, obviously, if we have more funds to help us with staffing and initiatives and programs, that enables us to kind of move forward more. The recreation one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you have 6 bullet points there. I feel very confident that the majority of that, first of all, the majority of that should have been done by the recreation superintendent and all their staff already. But since obviously we're going through a transition, that could definitely be done once
Oh, sure.
that person is in their role, and obviously we have to let the person get acclimated. But I feel pretty confident that all that could be done. And as far as legal, can you remind me, we approved an additional staff person for Corporation Counsel Kahan, right?
Mm-hmm. We did.
Okay. So that should be of help, because I know that, and I noticed also that we heavily use the Office of Corporation Counsel for everything. I mean, even stuff that we don't even think is legal. So at the end of the day, it all ends up going to him anyways. So that's also
I know.
a conversation too, when in other
All these things
in
to
other
do.
in other communities, municipalities would go through you, and then you would make a determination, and right. So a discussion as to how that, what the roles go, and maybe you should all go through Stuart and you, right? Or right. So how does that work, right? Having a conversation to really understand that process. Excuse me.
Also, it would be helpful because there are several things on this list that it seems that we're going to be hiring consultants to do, right? So when we're talking about like what is going to be staff intensive versus not staff intensive, that would be helpful when looking at the list.
Right.
Yeah. So just so we can know that if we're going to have an outside company come and look at our IT, if we're going to have an outside company look at that, we do understand that there may be some department heads who may have 1 or 2 meetings to be involved in that, but just kind of give us a general picture. Of,
So in that example,
Yeah.
it's going to take Craig's time all the time to go around to actually help that company do a map of all of our systems.
Okay.
So that's going to take his total time.
okay.
We don't have it now, right? Yeah.
Right.
So, but I'm just saying.
But yes,
that would be
I
helpful
totally get
in
what you're
looking at the
saying, but
priorities.
that's a huge burden on him to do that. I mean, it'll be advantageous to all of us because we'll have a better sense of what we're doing and where we're investing again, but that's hugely labor intensive.
I think this is great. I mean, I've seen this before, so, and having a laundry list of all the projects by departments, fabulous. There are just a couple of things, and I think you and I have discussed this. The roads, are getting really worse and worse, and I get the idea that you want to do a strategic, like a study on it, but there are just some things in this village that have to get done.
Oh,
I
it'll
really
get done.
don't, and it's sort of not really on here,
So-
what I call BAU, business as usual.
Correct.
It's sort of missing from the sizing of this, right? So it's the same
Okay.
thing that trustee Herrera and Bazemore both said, which is like, one said priority, the other one said size. It's all about sizing. It's not even about, there are a lot of dimensions to this, right? Something is a small project, something's a 3-year project, something may involve a whole bunch of our department heads, because consultants don't do it on their own.
Right.
The big joke about consultants, and I use many of them, is that they oftentimes take more time of the staff than you ever realize. So the sizing issue is really, I don't know how you're gonna do that, adding dimensions to this list, but there's definitely an issue of prioritization, and I think you started by saying, when you add something that's of high magnitude, what do you take off? I'm going to assume that you feel that this 1, 2, 3 pages is based on the budget that we allocated and based on your staff and workload, you can manage this. And I'm assuming, I may be assuming wrong, that this is the total of what you can do. So when we add something on, as we did today, you are going to have to come back and tell us in proportion to that what you're taking off. Or tell us that you could still do it. I mean, I don't know how, I mean, you know, that's just logical. So, and decide which pieces you're recommending to take off, if you in fact think that you have to. I don't know. That's
So
up to
I
you
think
to
in
figure out.
response to that, if we were to do this ETPA study, I mean, when we do that, we're looking at 30 to 60 days.
Mm-hmm.
That might push off starting the comprehensive plan.
All right, well, that will have to be made public
Right.
as well.
Exactly.
Right, so, or any other study, if you do the road study, right, which I'm a big fan of, and put out a list so people know where they live, what's happening, which I think Trustee Bazemore has been asking for as long as he and I served about the same time. So I think that's
On
what
the
you're
list
getting
now.
to. That's what you're getting to. I get that, which is great. You know, if you're gonna make it public, then you have to make the changes also public. Everything is on a
Absolutely.
plate, something comes off, something comes on.
Right.
So.
And why?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
and
Otherwise
and
huge.
the complexity of it, sure, I mean, you know. But otherwise, I mean, this is a lot, and it's terrific, and I'm
is.
assuming it's going to get updated. What's your plan here?
So
To
my-
review this with
So I just really
us?
wanted to have a conversation with all of you to see if this was gonna work for you. I do wanna put it into when we're gonna start these things
Mm-hmm.
in different months. Again, looking at what you just said, you know, not only the business as usual, but, you know, how do we scale this with staff? And
Right.
What's the burden gonna be on the staff to do all of these things? And then give you that list, you know, by month, when we're gonna start things, how we're gonna do them. That's really my next step. We've already started a lot of these things, it's just,
Yeah,
Okay.
but again, I wanted to make sure that you were comfortable with this. I would be giving you a monthly report that says, here's kind of how we've advanced these things, because I think it's important for all of you to know, so that when you're talking with your constituents, you can say, yeah, well, it's on the plan, and,
Right.
you know, oh, well, we're not gonna start that until August, because, you know, this is why,
yeah.
Okay.
you know, so that you can be
So,
responsible.
and just in response to that, please, when you do your report, let us know where you're at, because I think like recreation, that looks to me.
Yeah, that'll be
like
easy. Done,
Done,
done.
right?
I like check marks. Done.
Yeah, that's great.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so that's my next step, and,
John, did you have something?
yeah.
Yeah, just a couple things. Yeah, I think, you know, all the hiring, I think is, that's gonna, once you get those folks onboarded and in place, you know, in 60 to 90 days, that's gonna take a lot of weight off of you. You'll have reporting relationships, and that'll create some bandwidth for you on some more strategic things. You know, I guess for me is, you know, I'm just the energy geek here. You know, I don't really see it on the list, but, you know, the opportunity for energy takeout, you know, continues to be there, and I know that there's gonna be some financial opportunities that are gonna be sunsetting
I thought we
in
put that on
relationship
there.
to, I just didn't see it.
Thanks for pointing it out. I meant
Yeah,
to mention that.
I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I just have to say that, you know,
Yeah.
all these things are gonna cost money, and, I think that our largest opportunity for, you know, cost takeout is through energy independence. And, I think we need to find out as many different ways. I mean, we gotta get this NIPA thing figured out, you know, we gotta be able, we should be putting up panels, we should be on the grid, we should make that meter go backwards, because it's not only gonna save us money now, but it's gonna save us money in 5 years, and 10 years, and 20 years. NIPA just raised our rates nearly 7%, you know, and I don't know what the hell we'll get from them. So, I really, you know, and I love this list, this is great. I can't remember the last time I got a list that's as comprehensive as this, since I've been a trustee. I mean, this really covers a lot, so many different areas here. So, but the energy thing is important, because if we make those little investments now, they're gonna pay back for us, and we'll actually have money to pay for all these things. So.
Yeah, my
not only-
apologies.
They'll pay for themselves if
Yeah.
we do the energy savings. So
Right.
that's, but thank you for this. This is a great list.
But, I'm sorry, can I just add, thanks, John. That was, I meant to discuss that. So, one of the other things that can be added, and I don't mean to add more work, I know, but we have a dozen or so citizen-driven, groups. You
Okay.
appoint and we appoint. It would be nice as an addendum just as an
Right.
addendum, to write them each email and say, look, we have our projects lined up. You know, there should be some lining up and coordination. Not all of them work on projects, right? I mean, we know
Right.
that. That's okay. But some of them do, and some of them have some interesting projects, you know? So there should be somewhere an addendum, an appendix that says, you know, the community center group is looking at this project. You know, would just give it a fuller picture, because that too requires, I mean, look, the Sing Sing discussion today, I didn't realize how many hours you were spending on that. And while it's, and while I'm
Not just
happy
me,
that you
It's a
did it,
lot. Yeah.
well, I'm
Tom.
happy that you did it. Technically, they're a non-for-profit that you are helping. And while very important to the village, and it's the right thing to do, it is, you know, an interesting relationship. So I think that we do a lot of stuff with different non-for-profits, but I think there just needs to be sort of an appendix that says, and in addition to this, I think that gives a fuller picture of all that gets done here.
Sure.
And I think just a letter to the chairs and say, hey,
Mm-hmm.
what are you working on? And again, not all of them. Some of them are reactive, right? They
Right.
deal with
Yeah.
things that come in front of them. That's cool, you know, and that's all right.
Right.
As I look at this list, there's some that stand out as those that were identified as recommendations and priorities from the two most significant studies that we did last year, which was the housing needs assessment and the downtown redevelopment working committee report. And that's why there was so much money put forward in the 2018 budget, principally for the comprehensive plan, studying parking, and the economic development strategy. So that brings up, to me, those are big priorities that I'll be disappointed to see if they're getting derailed or pushed aside or pushed down
yeah,
on
we
the
don't wanna
list. But I understand that, you know, if something is deemed by the majority of the board to be more urgent, that other things may be pushed down a little bit. But one of the things that's on there that doesn't have money behind it, but was a DRWC recommendation, and is the re-engaging with New York State DOT, and that is something that is a multi-year project, and I know that it's, you have it listed here under Public Works for Streets. It's not something that's necessarily a significant outlay of cash,
Right.
and it's not something that necessarily is a significant outlay of time, but I just want to point out that that is something that I'm really pleased we're getting underway. It'll make a huge difference when we are able to rectify the mess that the quagmire is. The epicenter's right out here at this
Right.
intersection, so I'm glad that's on the list. I wish I could pretend that it was going to happen faster than it is. And I just want to point out that was one of the recommendations on the Downtown Redevelopment Working Committee, as was one of the other public works, specifically regarding to streets, which was coordinating the parking study with the street parking capacity, which is something that is just a perennial topic of conversation. I'm not sure that that's really going to make it, that's really going to be figured out independently at this point. One of these that I was surprised the way you said it, so I want you to clarify for me.
Okay.
You broke out economic development, create an economic development action strategy, and then there's 5 bullet points under there. My understanding was we were hiring a consultant to
Yes.
help guide us in that process. Okay, I
That is
thought when you were
correct.
describing it that you were saying that you were taking that on. I mean, you would be the guiding
I would
person.
be the guiding person on
Okay.
that, as
Okay.
opposed to like Lynn and the planning board doing the
Got it.
comprehensive
Okay.
plan.
Thank you. I
That's
needed,
what I meant by that.
I needed to understand that. And then some of the things like I understand what Trustee Herrera was saying, like, you know, maybe the marketing person isn't as significant as getting grants, and that makes sense logically, but I think in both cases, having some of those projects, some of those positions, those initiatives in place actually frees up staff time to get to the other things that we think of as being most important. I mean, I think about some, you know, the emergencies that come to us that really demand a lot of staff time for a week or two from multiple departments, fielding questions, getting it, and it becomes sometimes like a PR generated issue that now, like, you're not getting all this other really important stuff moving forward. So I would like to see us spend the time in the near future, at least with marketing, because to me that's a little more contained. Grants is a little more broad because there's so many different kinds of grants, and we don't currently have somebody on our staff that we can just say, here, you do more of this. But I'm thinking of some things, and I won't, say it right now, but I think people know some of the items that have come up in this year, and everything's come up, and this suck a lot of staff time, when really sometimes it's just, we need to get information out to the public. It needs to be presented in a way that people can hear it, and we don't have that point person right now. We don't have a person in-house that does that PR and marketing. And I also will say, as we're checking things off the list, a huge one that's checked off the list is in the marketing category, which is launching our village website. So that was a really big one.
Well, now it has to be maintained, not an easy.
Right, but it's launched. Give it a check mark. It's launched.
Yeah, but how much? It's fantastic. How much time do you think you spend on it on a week? I mean, maintenance of things oftentimes is more time consuming than rolling things out, and we have to be cognizant of that. What percentage of your week?
I'll be honest with you. I mean, there's certain things that I did in the past that this new website, it takes several more steps to do.
Right.
So there's that. There's also things that Craig and I are figuring out together, like embedding videos, and
Right.
there's more that we can talk about, in the future. But
Don't embed videos. Never embed videos. Open a YouTube channel.
we have it links to
Never
YouTube.
embed.
It's actually a link from YouTube. They
Okay.
have an embedded code that
Okay.
we've learned how to use and so on. But it's learning how to do that, and it's things that our old site didn't do, and people would call, and it's
All right.
mapping, and everything's been remapped so that you only put it up once, but you can map it there 5 different ways,
Right.
which is really helpful.
Okay.
But there's a lot of new things on there every day.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I think it looks great. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's long overdue. It's fantastic.
And what's nice is that when certain trustees call and say, I want to see this happen, we've really been able to implement them, but we can't really implement them until we know that you want it.
Right.
So it really helps us for
But the
feedback.
boards
so-
and committees page is working because I've gotten applications
yeah.
through that
Yeah.
already.
Oh, yeah, that one is a really nice,
Yeah.
that's a
You
really
did a
nice
great
one.
job on
Well,
that
they're
one.
responsive themes. They created it, so it's always
Well,
going to be mobile friendly because it's built in.
And then we also have forms that you can fill out for the boards and committees, and then they can check off things and submit it, which is new. We haven't been able to do that in the past, and it's learning how to create those forms, which is apparently their 5-tier level training. I got it.
Okay. Well, anyway, that's been, I put a check next to that, but there's also the ongoing improvements of that.
Did you want to say something else? You look
Yeah,
Eager.
I just wanted to echo the sentiment about the Route 9 conversation, but I do want to put on the record, and I will call them personally that sorry about that. I do want to echo your statement about Route 9 and the conversation with the New York State Department of Transportation. As much as I know that this board is committed and will be committed to improving that intersection, it's the New York State Department of Transportation. So with that being said, I do want to bring in our senator and our assemblywoman to really ask them formally, we need this as a priority in your legislative year. It's one of our areas that we're looking at that's really impacting what we do and how we operate and lack thereof. I feel very confident that they'll take it under consideration. But it's something that we need their involvement in ASAP. I know that we've been in contact, but in a formal way, so the public could actually know that we are actually reaching out to all our partners in government and agencies. But also, not that I don't want any blame, but it's not just the village. This is, and John, you, Deputy Mayor Codman, excuse me, you allude to this a lot, which is not incorrect. Working with the state is a whole different animal and not necessarily the easiest thing to do. And I've seen this board and currently go out of their way to try to put it on the radar. So we do need a little extra oomph by our leaders. And I'm pretty sure that our constituents at this whole table will back us up, and in making sure that the executive chamber knows that Ossining is, I don't want to use the word that I was going to use, not happy about their intersection. Unfortunately at times you have to be loud in order, to be noticed, appropriately loud. But I agree with you that it's just a priority.
And Debbie, I think you're going to be coming to us and giving us a bit of an update on meetings that you've been having internally, and I know you've met with Assemblywoman Gale about her helping to facilitate a meeting with the DOT so that maybe they'll pay
Right.
more attention to us
Right.
because she's the one who's telling them to.
So I'll bring you in on that, and then we can figure out a strategy for how we get them involved, because that would be great to have their support. Yeah, good.
Yeah, because I want like more than the initial meeting. 'Cause, like we've had meetings with them and DOT in the past, so
Right.
I want a little bit more. But yeah, we can discuss that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know what the process is now, and so we have to figure out how we get through the process. And then there's a few requests that I think that we can make. Perhaps they can help us with that. Just some minor modifications that I think will help traffic flow. So it'll be an interim response to community complaints. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay.
The one thing that when 200 Main Street's not on here and it was brought up, I don't know what's been going on with 200 Main Street because I recused myself from whatever happened before, and Omar wasn't, Trustee Herrera wasn't on the board at the time that those meetings were happening. So we need to be brought up, like sort of brought into the loop of what does the village think we might be doing with that white elephant?
I can give you a very quick synopsis of that, in that I'm looking at it as a facility that the village owns, and how do we preserve its historic integrity, and how do we transform that into a usable building, because it's too beautiful to lose. I have read lots of documents that have been done on the engineering of that, and so now what we have to do is figure out what our strategy is, how we're going to pay for the remediation and securing of the roof and a few other environmental things in there. And we'll have to figure out how much it's going to cost us, and then there'll have to be a decision, because it is a building that you own, and it's not going to go anywhere the way it is. It's in bad shape. But I'm hoping Dana will help me.
Just make yourself
I
invisible.
just-
Do not get yourself sucked into this one, Dana.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a gorgeous building, and it's got so much history, and I just don't want to lose it. We have to figure out how to save it, but we need to save it. That is a higher priority.
Yeah.
And then whatever else happens later. But that's the down dirty.
And we're proposing that village taxpayers pay for the preservation.
Well, I
at
don't
this
know.
stage.
I'd like to apply for some grants, actually.
Okay.
Some historic preservation grants and something else, but that's why I want to dig into the grant part of that, to see what we can get from the state to help us.
Great.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll work this time.
Well, yeah, it's on my list.
And we've applied for historic preservation grants, but that was years ago. So
Right.
hopefully now this is
Yeah.
a new day and we'll have more success.
Okay.
Okay.
The next thing, so, the
Are
next
you
top.
posting this somewhere? It's a public meeting, but are you posting this anywhere?
Now that it's not a draft anymore, I'll post it on,
Make some changes.
I'll
and
figure out
update it?
with Jamie where we should post it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, Paul wanted to be here to talk about the Broadway Bridge project, but it's Valentine's Day, so I told him that I would take care of this. We received the bids on this project, and we are looking at a bonding for $2.6 million. It is rounded up to a whole number because we believe that we might have, something happen. Whenever you do a construction project, especially a large one, and especially a bridge that we're going to undertake, you never know what we're going to run into when we get under. And we also had talked about, if we have additional funds at the end, being able to renovate the stairs that go up to Main Street from that bridge, and expanding that. Because we are doing some of the sidewalk work there, where the bridge is, in front of the community center, and now, we want to have a little bit of money, maybe extra, to do that project if we can, because those stairs are falling apart and they need to be redone. I know there was a discussion about whether we owned it or the state owned it, but
The steps that are going up to the aqueduct, right?
Correct.
Where the aqueduct trip.
Correct.
Goes over the top of the double arch.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. but we rounded it up.
The ones that are,
Oh, we know what steps they are. I think we're concerned about the village undertaking a capital project to improve something that isn't in our realm. I mean, that's what I'm, otherwise, why do they look like that right now? Because we don't let our stuff look like that. I feel like New York State is the one that's been neglecting
Right,
it.
and that's
It's
a
not on the
question that
radar.
we have. We'll definitely be looking into how that all works and if we should be asking the state to help us with that, but we just need to get it done. You know, and so, we didn't want to limit ourselves we're only going to borrow the money that we actually need. So,
Let me just clarify. I'm very much an advocate for having those steps be fixed. I am concerned about the village undertaking an improvement project on something that's not our responsibility, because then it becomes our responsibility, and we have a lot of things we already have to pay for. And I'd like,
understand.
if the state's supposed to do it, then I want them to pay for it.
Our liability, I think, is the issue always.
understand.
in
Is it?
working.
But is it our liability?
No, I think it becomes our liability also, doesn't it, Stuart, when we fix things when they're not really ours?
Well, if you become the entity that fixes it and someone gets injured, you're the entity
You'd
that's
be
ultimately going to be
yeah, right.
responsible for it.
And we will look into that, but right now we need to get the project started. We didn't want to
And
be
that's obviously not the focus
short-sighted.
of the Broadway Bridge project.
Right.
It just
Right.
came up and it caught me by
Right.
surprise.
Yeah.
Debbie, just, if you don't mind,
Yes.
I'm not feeling well. I'm going
Okay.
to go home. This is
Okay.
as late as I could go today,
Okay.
so thanks.
Glad you made it.
Yeah.
Feel better.
Work session.
All right, feel better.
Thanks.
We won't take any votes.
We're not doing that anyway. So you'd be authorizing bonding of 2.6 million to be paid off over 20 years. It's an estimated cost of $169,000 per year, is what that would be. Con Ed is going to be reimbursing us for a portion of that because they have utilities underneath it. And, so that is
we don't know how much they're gonna,
yes, it's.
they have utilities on the bridge?
Yeah,
That's right.
74,000 they'll be reimbursing us for.
That's all we could get out of them?
It's
It's not their bridge. They just have utilities under it.
just their utilities.
Tom, would you like to
They're
comment
so
on that?
happy.
I'm just going to add, based on the letter that I
Right.
read, that the electrical portion is $74,000. The gas portion was $200,000, which they're apparently going to opt not to do as
Right.
part of this project.
Right.
Well, no, wait a second. Now, I have a problem with that, okay? We need to get back to Con Ed, or we need to talk to public service, okay? Because we are not gonna fix that bridge and then have them tear that bridge up because they didn't fix their infrastructure. That, I am not happy with that. I'm not yelling at you, Tom, but like, my head's about to explode with Con Ed. You know, they run around, they tear up the streets, they do whatever, they just leave things all over the place. I think we should push back on that. I really think we should.
Okay.
No, if we're gonna fix this bridge and there's utilities under there, they should go in there and take care of that. So I would, and I don't care if I have, call
Enforce them.
Sandy, call Carlucci, I don't care, that's just wrong. We're spending $2.6 million to fix the bridge, and that one of their gas lines could go and poof, they're gonna go dig it up. That's not acceptable.
All right.
Sorry, that just makes me crazy.
look
That's
into
just
that.
like insane.
Right.
We understand the frustration is directed at
Yeah,
Con
yeah,
Ed. It's
I
not the
just-
first time we've experienced working with Con Ed.
Stuart,
Ugh.
I just have one question. I know I've asked this in the past.
Yes.
Is the Broadway Bridge our bridge? Like, is it our responsibility to fix?
That,
We own that. We own
it is village property,
Right.
yes.
Yep.
There's no way we can get the town to. There's no way we can get the town to actually. No, Victoria. You know, I'm referencing to. Like, did we not go to a NICOM that said that the
Did you ask Wade Beltramo about any potential for a bridge, regardless of the fact that it may be in the village, if it is obligated to be paid for by town government? If it is, then this bridge project will halt, I'm sure. Because they don't have any money in the budget for it, nor would they have any interest in pursuing it.
I will make the inquiry.
Okay.
You just send them a bill, see if they pay us.
Oh, sure.
Just to be clear, I don't, a lot of work has already been done to bring the project to where it is now, so I
Right.
don't,
Oh, we're not stopping.
okay.
Yeah, that's not where I'm at. We're doing it.
But we should understand what is the expectation and the
yeah.
obligation of the town, other level of government,
Yeah, and-
odd as
and
it may be.
Con
There
Ed
was
is
that,
gonna-
that interesting conversation
Con Ed's
2
gonna
years
do their
ago.
gas line as well as the electric for the bridge construction. That's just like, no, I
I hear you.
crazy.
All right.
Okay.
Anything more for us to know about that exciting project timeline?
We would like for you to vote on the bonding resolution at the next meeting so that we can get started.
I meant, when do I get to cut the ribbon?
November?
No. It was August 30th, so I don't know if we're still on track for that, but it was August 30th because I said we'll cut the
I was
ribbon on the
just being
31st,
generous.
which is the Friday before Labor Day weekend, because we want it open for the schools in the fall.
Right, no, I understand. I know,
Award the bid.
yes.
Yeah, we're just awarding the bid. We're not borrowing the money yet, right?
No, you're doing both.
Oh, we are.
You have
So
to
there's two-
authorize the bonding.
And then
award the bid.
and award the
And
bid.
you-
Okay.
we'll have those resolutions on for next
Okay.
week.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, okay.
Stuart, you had two last minute
Two-
sort of
two-
quickie items
Real
you
quick,
mentioned.
first, El Manabita Sports Restaurant, they have been fully vetted for their cabaret permit. They did have one last year, and that was Friday through Sunday, DJ and live music, 2 p.m. to 2 a.m., with a maximum of 15 performers per month. They were cleared by police, they were cleared by building, so I'd like to put a resolution before the board for next Wednesday to grant the cabaret license under the same terms to El Manabita.
Fine with me.
Okay?
Where is this located?
107 Main.
Okay.
Old Isabella's.
Next to the church.
Last item, folks, is with regard to the Judd Law license agreements that we have for two particular properties. The one at the old DPW facility, Judd Law has asked if they could extend that for 1 year with an option for a second year, because their construction work that they're doing for Metro North will continue. We receive $4,500 a month now, so for a total of $54,000 a year. The other property is the facility or the parking area at 7 North Water Street across from Virium. They want to do that just as a month-to-month. They're paying $1,000 a month. From what I have spoken, and I think Debbie's spoken as well, they're probably going to be out of there in a couple of months. That's the anticipated. So, so it would just be for those two. So it's just, we're going to present a resolution with regard to those two, and that's it.
For the first matter of the DPW site, the village is able to cancel the contract at any time, correct?
The license agreement, there is a provision in there. I think both have the opportunity to opt out. Yeah. I mean, they've been there. This agreement actually expired on January 31. They are continuing to do their Metro North work, so that's why they need as a setup. And they figure at least 1 to 2 years, so.
Okay, I'm just asking because 2 years from now, the village is undergoing, as we had a conversation about our village-owned properties and potential determinations of use for those properties. I don't want to be binded. Let's say we had to remediate a particular part that we got a grant for, or we decided that we're going to fix the part. I don't want to be tied because we can't use it. That's all.
No,
So I understand. They definitely said they really wanted it just for 1 more year because they're finishing up their project. And they just wanted the option for the additional. It probably would go more month to month. But there's more to that site. And there's other initiatives that are starting to happen down there with some businesses and the Main Street area. So it probably wouldn't happen for 2 more years anyway, so.
Okay.
I missed one.
Do you want to go back to that?
Yeah, if I could.
Please, please.
So, the Opportunity Zone, this is a new law that's highly contentious. I can say most of the New York delegates voted no for this legislation, but it was called the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017.
Well, they voted no on the whole thing.
Right.
You're looking at one little
I'm looking
tiny
at one little
program
piece.
in it that
No,
might be beneficial for Ossining, so.
I understand that this is a very big program but there is one tiny little piece that could really help us, and that is the Opportunity Zone, which gives us a new economic tool for low-income communities. So we are on the map as qualifying for this, and I don't know if the governor is going to take any action on it, just because I'm not sure, because it's sort of an all or nothing thing, but the governor is required, if he's going to take action, to take 25% of the eligible zones in the whole state and recommend them for this project. So I would like to see if we could be one of them. What this does is it provides an economic incentive for developers to invest in our community without us having to provide a pilot agreement, because there are a lot of advantages to them. And I really like OPM, other people's money. So it's something that I think we're going to have to reach out as quickly as we can if this board is supportive of asking for that designation. I think it doesn't hurt us to ask. If the governor chooses not to do any, then we're not out by asking. But if we could lobby to have us included, that would be really great.
If I may, with the approval of my colleagues, recommend that I link you with the two representatives from the governor's office. I'm pretty sure that they could either come here or you could start a phone conference just to see what
Where
the
is
process is.
Okay.
And any governor's office programming, you kind of have to go out of your way to say, hey, look, it's me. I applied. No, seriously, I applied. You know, so so
happy
if
to
that
do
so if that means that, you know, we have to take a trip to the city and request a meeting,
I'll
or a
do
trip to Albany, you know,
Yep.
hey, I'm following up on my application. I want to meet with your staff. All that, you know, a little lobbying on our side.
Yeah. How many communities are there? Because you said 25% of the eligible communities need to
Oh.
be asking for it. So how many communities are there in New York State? Is there? You don't have to count them if it's not something you
I can tell
already
you that
know.
if you pull up the map off of the links that I provided to you, it's massive in New York. It's massive.
I'm just thinking we have so many relationships with, I mean, Sandy and David have relationships.
Right.
I would imagine there's a fair number of them just in, I mean, I'm guessing if we qualify, what some of the other communities are that we're familiar with that
Right.
qualify. And we do have a network of other communities
Right.
that probably would benefit from this. And maybe we could en masse start coordinating to ask. I mean, hopefully the governor's office could recommend to us what would be a logical path for that, but mobilizing some of our colleagues in the other municipalities wouldn't
Yeah.
be that hard to do, because everybody wants other people's money. And apparently we can't get it
Well-
without them, and they can't get it without us.
Is it an
So-
application?
There's very little in the Hudson Valley.
Oh, nice.
They,
Can I see that?
yes.
Is it an application, Debbie?
No, I
No?
think we just have to call
okay.
him. And again, I went to the governor's website. There is nothing on it, which made me a little nervous, other than the fiscal report that was done by the Tax and
Buchanan?
Finance Department regarding the full impact of this legislation,
Okay.
which was not really pretty.
Okay, cool. So let's
Horsley,
get
But
that.
I would love to have that, because there's very few in the Hudson Valley, you know, not including New York City. But when you look at the whole state, there's a lot of Plattsburgh, Utica, Buffalo area, there's a lot of qualifying communities. And the whole impetus is that a lot of us are not recovering the way the majority of the country is recovering, and it's the federal government's way of saying, we're going to help you. And this is an incentive for developers to take their profits and reinvest it into the community and keep that cycle going. So for us, it's a huge benefit.
NICOM would be probably a valuable resource to connecting with the other cities and villages that are going to be on this list, because they'll have a relationship with every city and village that would be on this list.
Oh, I can find out.
I mean, I want to talk to, I think the governor's office is a first step, just to kind of see if because if they say, don't even waste your time, we're not even going to consider it because we
Yeah.
refuse to work with the federal government, then, okay, we'll stop wasting our time on that. But if they think it's worthy, then NICOM would probably be really good at connecting us with other municipalities to make it possible for the governor to go after the money.
Right.
Great, thanks.
So let's hope.
That's exciting.
So you'll help me?
Yes,
Great.
absolutely.
Thank you. That's it. That's all I have.
Then we need to, yes? I was going to adjourn, so go ahead. I was going to make a motion. Or ask for a
Paul sent me a
motion.
text based on your comment with regards to Con Ed for the Broadway Bridge.
So
and you wanted me to
Paul's
read
here
something?
Wow.
So Paul's enjoying his Valentine's
Virtually
Day.
attending our meeting. Okay.
I
So
heard.
he would
Wonders of
like me to
technology.
just say, he said to tell John that, that Con Ed said that the gas utility interconnection is being eliminated and there is no need to install a new line after the bridge construction. So, there is gas on either side of the bridge, so you should,
Oh, so there will be no line underneath.
Oh.
they
Okay.
won't be tearing apart.
Can't
the
justify
bridge.
their 200,000.
It's an
Okay.
abandonment.
So,
All right, so
so-
no Con Ed
so there-
rally.
So there's nothing on the bridge that has to do with Con Ed gas.
That's what he's saying, yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
it's on the sides, so.
Don't worry, we'll have more excuses to bother Con Ed
So
when they're
I'll-
not doing what we
If,
want them to do.
if Con Ed digs up the bridge, I just talked to Paul, right? Is that how that works?
Help with you to talk about, got that, Paul?
Mayor Garrity, if I may
Yes.
just very quickly, I wanted to request that Stewart's intern policy draft that's being submitted this week, if the board deems that has enough time to review it before Wednesday, be put under new business or a vote, depending on how we feel what the policy.
Sure, if you have a new draft, send
so
it out.
that's all.
We've discussed it before. We can review it by email and then discuss it publicly at the meeting. That's fine.
Will do.
Thank you. Then can we have a motion to adjourn to executive session for matters of personnel related to specific persons?
So moved.
Second.
It's a quick one, I think. On the board?
It's not debatable.
All right. Well, okay, I'll take the vote in a second. Thank you very much for joining us. And it is still Valentine's Day. I hope you all are enjoying an evening with loved ones, just as we all are. And we look forward to seeing you next week at the police court, Birdsall Fagan Police Court Facility on Spring Street. This meeting is adjourned to executive session. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned to executive session.
Is this something?
Good night,
like
Ellen.
that?